Santa Barbara City Council meeting together on a Monday afternoon. Will you please stand with me to say the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Falcone, Francisco, Horton, House.
Here.
Schneider.
Here.
Williams. Mayor Bloom.
Here. If they don't come, you can move in. Oh, they're here. Okay. Just didn't want you to feel out there all alone. Do we have any public comment on something not on the agenda?
No, we don't, Madam Mayor.
Okay. Then we can go to the first. Go ahead and read the title of what we're doing today.
Fiscal year 2010 recommended operating and capital budget.
Okay. So our first, go ahead, Mr. Armstrong.
Yes, Madam Mayor and members of the council, today we have 4 budgets to present to you today, and this is the last of the departmental presentations. The first will be the airport, followed by the waterfront, followed by the finance department, and last but not least, the non-departmental department, which is, as you know, some of the miscellaneous areas that we don't categorize. And if anybody wants to speak, I'll be asking them which department they want to speak on, and then my recommendation would be after each department that you take comments on the respective budget before we go on to the next one.
Okay, sure. That makes sense. Okay, so we'll start with the airport department, and Ms. Ramsdell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We're pleased to present the airport's fiscal year 2010 proposed budget. This afternoon, this is the kind of our little agenda that we've planned, is to give you an overview of our department, the department goals by which we develop the budget, our revenue analysis, expenditure assumptions, and new performance objectives for the fiscal year 2010. The Airport Department's mission is to provide the region with safe, modern, convenient facilities to access the national air transportation system. As an enterprise fund, we are the Airport Department is self-supporting. We use no local tax dollars, nor do we receive them. Our revenues are derived from tenant rents and user fees, and federal law requires that our revenues must be spent on airport operations, maintenance, and capital improvements. This is our Airport Department organizational chart. For fiscal year 2010, we have 53 employees, which includes 3 managers and 2 supervisors. Our employees range in city service from 33 years down to fairly recently hired. I'd say that a majority of our employees have over 15 years of city service. We have 8 programs in the department. Administration, of course, is responsible for the management oversight and support of, to City Council and Airport Commission. Our Business and Properties program has 4 employees that through our leasing program, property management programs, generate nearly all the revenue that the airport receives. They also administer the FAA grant program, which we've received over $40 million over the last 5 years. Our marketing communications program is responsible for air service development with such good air service that we've received recently with our Sacramento service and Allegiant to Las Vegas. Also, they are responsible for a public information program, which will be critical during the construction of the new terminal to keep people informed. Our facilities maintenance program is responsible for the 56 buildings on the airport, and I might say they're pretty much aging buildings as they're World War II vintage. And they are challenged with meeting regulations regarding lead-based paint, Americans with Disabilities Act, and making these buildings be useful for our tenants. Airport Operations Area Program is responsible for maintaining over 5.6 million square feet of airfield pavement with runways, taxiways, hundreds of signs, and airfield lighting. Our security program has probably been the most impacted in the last 10 years with the events of September 11, 2001. They've almost have monthly new directives that come down from the Transportation Security Administration with new requirements that we have to comply with for the security related to the airlines as well as the whole airport. We've had difficulty filling positions in the airport patrol positions in this program, and hopefully with the market adjustments that were just completed with the recent memorandum of understanding with this unit, it will help in attracting viable candidates to keep these positions filled. Our certification and operations program is responsible for making sure that we comply with our federal aviation regulations, our airport certification, as well as our noise abatement program and responding to citizen concerns and complaints. And also our aircraft rescue and firefighting services, which are provided by contract with the city fire department. And this fire unit only responds to aircraft incidents on the airport. And facilities and planning and development are responsible for our planning, permitting, and engineering and contract management for basically our whole capital program. As I said, we have 53 employees. Over 70% of those employees are in the security and maintenance divisions, with a very small remaining number in administration type of positions. And now Assistant Director Hazel Johns will take you through our budget strategy.
Good. In developing the budget for the department this year, we wanted to make sure that it was a balanced budget, not using any of our reserves, and also to maintain our ability to finance the airline terminal project. In crafting the budget, we developed our revenue forecast first based on the state of the economy as we knew it at the time, and also wanting to maintain levels of service and capital improvements. Some of the factors that affected our revenues, passenger count, as you know, this fiscal year it's down about 6.5%. And with that reduction, it also impacts our concession revenues with parking, rent-a-cars, and food and gift shop revenues. The airlines, with those capacity reductions that they've made, have also reduced some flights that we know, so that impacts our landing fees. Excuse me, tenant vacancies and rental income. Our tenants are local business people, and they too are impacted by the economy as well. So sometimes we have more vacancies than normal. But those were conditions that we included in our projections. This cash flow gives you an illustration of what we're projecting starting in 2010 going to 2013. And we anticipate moving into the new terminal in 2012 fiscal year. So you'll notice an increase in commercial aviation. That's the airlines paying increased rental for their space, going from about $2.1 million to $4.1 in 2013. Another line item, the terminal, that's concessions, rent-a-car parking concessions, and that's going from $4.7 to $5.9 million annually. So we're hoping to increase our revenues from $12.3 to $16.1 in the next 4 years. On the expense side, we have increased salaries and benefits based on a modest, I believe it's a 3% adjustment going forward. And then we have also added an incremental operating expense, you'll notice at the bottom, in 2012 and 13 to account for increased utility cost, increased supplies, and any increased employees that might be needed for the new terminal. But even so, we're anticipating that we would have more than $2.4 million remaining in 2013. That does not include passenger facility charge revenue,
which will also be used for the terminal. Our policy reserves as of July 1st of 2008 for this fiscal year were fully funded. We did use a little over $1 million in our capital program, and then after doing that in this year's budget, we still had $889,000 in reserves above policy. Our balancing strategy, once we developed our revenues, we projected that we were going to be about $267,000 short of FY09. So we used a dual approach to address that shortfall, both increasing our revenues where we could and then cutting our expenses in the operational side. We reduced overall reductions in operating expenses of $129,000, which is about a 3% budget reduction. We also reduced a position, eliminated a position in the department that saved us about $77,000, and there were some minor service level impacts in our patrol division. As I said earlier, the revenue projections were based on the current economic condition last fall. Also, real estate changes, market rate is what we try to achieve at the airport, and some of the properties in town have been dropping their rental amounts, so we paid attention to that. And also the impact of the airline industry capacity reductions, which affects us, as I said, landing fees and concessions. This pie chart shows you where our revenues are generated. And commercial industrial properties is falling behind terminal leases, which is a good thing. We want the terminal to pay for itself. Commercial aviation leases, those are the FBOs and other general aviation tenants on the airfield. Interest income, there's a difference in what I'm showing and what's in your book. On page C6, my interest reflects our operating interest only, but in the book it also includes the interest for the T-Hangar project, which is in Fund 446. Finance combined those two for simplicity. C6. Summary of revenues. This shows you our actual revenues for 2008, projected for 2009, and our proposed 2010 budget. You'll notice that non-commercial leases, once again, the FBOs, general aviation, they've been impacted by fewer corporate flights, fewer flights altogether, operations, and also high fuel prices. The commercial aviation is also down, as we mentioned, with several airlines making changes in the number of flights that we have, the frequency, and also the size of the aircraft. Overall, we'll be about 2% below 2009 budget in 2010. We are recommending a proposed fee change in our parking lots. Our airport parking operation is managed by AMCO Parking System. They were selected after a result of an RFP process. They have extensive experience in airport parking operations, parking equipment. Their contract goes to 2013. And they also provide the 24-hour shuttle from the lot number 2 for employees and passengers. The last adjustment we had was in 2007, and we always, when we look at a rate adjustment, we survey other airports to compare our rates with theirs. What we're proposing is an adjustment to the short-term parking rate, increasing it from $17 to $20 per day. We want to encourage short-term parkers in the short-term lot and discourage long-term parkers in the short-term lot. We want to maintain our maximum daily rate for long-term parkers, but we also are going to remove the 2 free days on the weekly rate. We anticipate an increase in parking revenue of $65,000. On the expenditure side of our ledger, This pie chart shows the allocation of our expenses. Salaries and benefits under supplies and services, the $4.6 million, that does include the fees that we pay, or the contract that we pay back to the fire department for ARF, and Public Works for engineering. And if you also add in our utility costs, that's about 58% of that line item. So when it comes to reduction for 8 programs, it's hard to come up with substantial reduction in the balance of that category. As I said, we wanted to make sure that our capital program this year was fully funded with the revenues that we're projecting. And so you'll notice under equipment and capital, it's a small capital program for next year, but it is fully funded. No reserves will be used. This is just a chart showing our experience for the last 5 years in the projection for 2010. Salaries, as you can see, are adjusted, so would be allocated cost, and ARF would also trail that because of salary adjustments. Our expenditure reductions overall, about 6% of the operating budget. We followed other city departments by reducing and in some cases eliminating these particular line items, meeting and travel, training. Overtime was also reduced, and if we're successful in fully funding all of the positions in patrol, that will certainly make a huge improvement for us in overtime. We've also cut back on the number of hours for the hourly employees. We also looked at our vehicle inventory, and we had 2 pieces of equipment that were funded with federal funds that we felt we could take off of the city's replacement and maintenance policy because we're going to, 1, they're not being used, and 2, we could get those replaced with FAA dollars. Our computer replacement program was deferred, as it has been with other departments in the city, and then we reduced the maintenance and supplies as much as we could. We have 2 staffing changes. One, as I mentioned earlier, administrative assistant position was deleted. We also had a reclassification of an airport marketing assistant. Capital projects. We looked at our proposed capital improvement plan that we developed last November and identified one major project to include in the fiscal year 2010 budget, and that's the Firestone Drainage Project. We also will maintain our facilities with routine ordinary maintenance dollars. It's all funded with 2010 revenues. As I said before, no reserves. And unfortunately, we were not eligible for any stimulus funding. FAA allocated what money they did receive on their national priorities, and safety is the first priority. We just completed our safety project. So the terminal didn't qualify, so we weren't eligible for that. We did apply, but we weren't eligible. This is an example of why we need the drainage improvement. With these buildings located just south of Firestone Road, they flood when it rains, not when it floods, but when it rains. And so the first year we'll be doing design and permitting since it's in the coastal zone, and then the second year we'll complete the project with putting in the drain. We've identified $550,000 for general maintenance, roof replacement, street repair, and our infrastructure as well. Now back to Ms. Ramsdale.
Well, we've had a great year in fiscal year 2009. I think probably most notably is the award of the bids and beginning of construction for the airline terminal project, and now the sale of the bonds for the project. So that has been certainly a very major milestone for the department. We've also selected an operator and a company to construct a self-serve fuel station for small general aviation aircraft, which will help the smaller user save on the cost of fuel. We've restored Sacramento service with Horizon Airlines. We also relocated the terminal gift shop back to its original location. This is our space issue in the terminal. We keep moving things back and forth. They're doing very well back in their original spot. We've installed a oil collection facility for the T-Hanger project and implemented a tenant security awareness program that resulted in a 66% reduction in security access control alarms. The Security Operations Center gets an alarm every time a door is opened and left open for a certain amount of time in the airline terminal. They get thousands and thousands of alarms a day. We reduced the significant reduction was just training the employees at the airline terminal not to leave doors ajar and to make sure they were shut. So that really was a big boost to making their workload at least more efficient. We updated our stormwater pollution prevention plan, and then developed a stormwater management plan. Our new objectives for fiscal year 2010, I'll just highlight a few of them, is to, in business and property, this is along with the airline terminal project, is to complete our solicitation for a concession program in the new airline terminal. Marketing and communications, to do a comprehensive public outreach for the project to make sure that passengers know what changes are happening when they come to use the terminal. Facilities maintenance is quarterly inspection of 70% of our stormwater inlets, and we have 400 of those on the airport property. So there's quite a few. Some of them are located in very muddy areas, which is the reason for the 70%. If we're not able to get into those areas to maintain them, we can inspect them on foot. The air operations area is to install LED lights on Taxiway B, but we've since updated this. We're going to, we're out to bid now, to replace all the taxiway lighting with LED lights, which will be a huge savings for us in terms of electricity. FAA hasn't approved runway lighting with LED lights yet, but they are working on it, and as soon as those are approved, we'll be replacing those as well. And security, we reduced the hours in our security operations center. We're closing from midnight to 4 a.m., which are the least busy time of the day. And airport patrol, the calls that come into the security operations center will be forwarded to their cell phones, so airport patrol will answer those calls while they're on duty. In facilities planning and development, we'll be completing phase 2 of the tidal circulation field study. I think recently we approved a contract towards that project. We're completing 30% of construction of the airline terminal project and complete construction of the consolidated rental car facility. And Airport Commission, at their regular meeting on March 18th, recommended approval of the Airport Department annual budget and capital program for fiscal year 2010. That concludes our presentation, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Mr. Horton.
I have, Karen and Hazel, I have questions related to the performance measures. And what I'm going to do is just read them off with the page reference and not wait for an answer until I've read them all. So the first one is G25. And I'm just wondering, I looked at your passenger estimate, which is up about 15,000. Wondered if you could explain. That looks good. Just wondering. On page G27, airline cost per plane passenger, I thought we looked at this in finance with respect to the bond matter, and that the cost would have to go up to compensate for the bond. So I'd like to have an explanation of that. And then the last one is on G31. I could not comprehend why cost per square foot for building maintenance would go from 0.94 to 2.61, which is a giant increase. And then I couldn't understand how the cost per passenger for custodial services would drop from 71 to 58, because all the costs I know are going up. And so the last one is page G33, AOA maintenance cost per acre doubling from 313 to 700. That's it.
Let's see. The total airline passengers on page G25. We've had a decrease this year, and I think we're just planning for, or have forecasted a very modest increase for the following fiscal year, hoping for economic recovery.
So based, okay.
Yeah. And then on the cost per in-plane passenger, this is the current, well, why don't you answer?
No, you're exactly right. The cost for, we do project an increase in the cost per in-plane passenger once the new terminal takes place. Prior to that, we're trying to maintain that level as low as we can. And $5.62 is the target that we've reached for fiscal year 2010. But it will go up. It definitely will go up when they occupy the new terminal.
Okay, and then on page G31, unless you know about the building maintenance, I'll have to get back to them on that. The increase. No, I'll have to get back to you on the building maintenance one. And then on the custodial, in 2009, we had increased use of overtime because of vacancies, and then also the increase in cost in green cleaning products. And in fiscal year 2010, we're projecting less overtime because we're filling our regular positions, so it should help bring the cost down. And AOA maintenance costs per acre, I'll have to get back to you on that one too. Okay.
Okay, if you could, I know you will CC us on everyone
Yes.
on that. Fine, thanks.
Absolutely.
Okay, Ms. Falcone?
Thank you. Couple of questions that have to do with sort of practicalities when you had the cash flow projections. The commercial aviation at the new terminal, you said, was going to go up in terms of the money that the airlines are paying to have a slot. Have you discussed this with our current airlines, and they know it's coming and they understand what's going to happen, and they basically agreed, and nobody's such an increase unless they increase the number of flights, and they really do get many more passengers to come. It runs the risk of maybe having some folks leave the area, and it is their choice. So how have those conversations been going?
We had the most recent communication that I had with all of the airline representatives for property happened through email and telephone conversations last month in anticipation of the bond issue going forward. They are set, they understand, they're excited about it. The cost per square foot for the current terminal rate is about $75 annually. With the feasibility report that we have, based on the interest rate that we had with the bonds, it's still about $75 to $76 per square foot. Granted, that gives them twice the space that they currently have, but they desperately need that space. And they have been supportive of this project at least since 1990 or before. So they're all up to speed. We'll have continued conversations with them as we go forward, definitely, and keeping them in the loop.
Okay, great.
Because they've been involved since the very beginning.
Excellent. Okay, because we certainly don't want them dropping out. The whole thing will fall apart. The other one is more of a comment than it is a question, but there is a question. I've been receiving complaints about the corporate planes over the city of Goleta. They are much louder than commercial aviation sometimes even. And I'm wondering if there are any incentives, and there's so many more takeoffs and landings and so on, and I know that it's a good revenue source, but are there any incentives, or has anybody had a conversation about incentives for quieter planes? The newer planes are quieter, the older, big jets, Lears and things, they really make a racket. So I'm wondering if there's a way to help give incentives to the corporations or the owners of the planes in some way to upgrade to a quieter, or are there standards that they have to meet? Because they're just on their own. I know that commercial planes have standards that they have to meet, but I don't think that general aviation does. So could you help me a little bit?
No,
with
they
that?
don't. In 1990, the federal government passed a law that phased in the quieter aircraft for commercial airplanes.
Right.
But it cut it off at 75,000 pounds, which really cut out most of general aviation and the corporate aircraft. Right now, actually, for the last couple of years, there's been an airport group across the country that have been working together to try and lobby Congress to pass a similar law as they did for the commercial airlines, for especially the corporate jet, the older corporate jets, to phase in those with quieter engines. Over time, it's because of fuel efficiency and that sort of cost efficiency, the owners of these aircraft will start phasing in the newer aircraft just for cost purposes. But we have joined in with this group of airports nationwide to help push for having legal standards. Really, there's not much incentive that you could give these owners of these aircraft. Some of them are called fractionals. They're
I know what that is.
but those are sort of like a
Partnerships, basically.
partnership or a I was going to say condo, but not a condo thing.
Tenants in common.
Timeshare,
Yeah,
yes.
timeshare.
So often even finding who owns the aircraft is difficult. So I think having a national standard is really the way to go, just like it was with the.
Okay,
the
I
airlines.
appreciate that we're involved with that because we want to be, good neighbors to the great folks in Goleta. So
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. House.
Thank you, and thanks for the really clear presentation. You mentioned in one of your earlier graphs the allocated cost reduction of 14%, and maybe you explained it and I missed it, but how is that being achieved? I mean, that's a big hunk. I mean, that's a big change.
Allocated cost, I believe one of the areas where it was particularly reduced, and that's with IS, with computer replacements and that sort of thing. The rest of it would be salaries, pretty much from all of the different units that we have, along with building or vehicle maintenance. We achieved a reduction when we took those 3 vehicles off the maintenance and replacement list.
Okay.
That dropped it, I believe, I want to say about $75,000 by reducing it that way. So
Wow.
even though salaries are going up, we did target a couple of the particular line items under allocated cost.
But those didn't have associated service reductions to our patrons and customers at the airport?
No service reductions, correct.
Let's see, page G27. Let me see if I can find what that was. Oh, right. On the performance measures, and you talk about the lease and the percentage, for instance, of the buildings that are leased, and it's holding pretty high, 98%, 98.9. And you talk about the land that's leased. There's nothing that gives us an idea of what the potential of the specific plan area part of the airport is. I'm just kind of curious for the future as to, it looks like there's an awful lot of the areas currently undeveloped or underdeveloped. Have there been any projections made or any idea that you have as to what might be possible if we were to fully develop that? Is something that we could begin to set performance objectives to increase the amount of that land that becomes productive?
Currently, on the 15-acre parcel that we all know as Parcel 22, right off of Hollister, we're currently generating right at $400,000 a year just in the small land leases that we have. We earlier this year went to Airport Commission or to City Council, and we discussed perhaps doing a a new plan, updating the specific plan, looking at reducing those parcels. As we develop that plan, we certainly will identify our concept of cost per square foot. Generally, if we were to lease every square foot of it, I would estimate it to be about $1 million a year
$1 million a year more than what we're doing right now.
total. So I
Oh,
would
total.
say
Oh, total. I'm sorry.
$600,000 additional
600,000.
revenue.
Okay.
Right.
But that would be just as land. It wouldn't be developed land.
Right, it would be bare ground. Right. As an example, the consolidated rent-a-car facility that we're doing with the rent-a-car companies, it's about 4 acres, and they'll be paying 13 cents a square foot for the whole parcel where
I
their
see.
building and the storage facility will be. So that's how I was thinking about that.
Okay, good. It's something maybe to think about for the future is to have us, maybe you already do, but have it as a goal to get as much, of that whole area productive as possible, because it's been such a great boost to the airport. And then on G29 in the marketing area, 29, yes, in the marketing area. Let's see if I can find that. Okay, looking at the market share under performance measures, I see that we're currently at 59, looking at, for the rest of this year, 60%, and then dipping down to 55%. That would be, I guess, during the airport terminal construction. That would be an reason why, or is it just the economic downturn?
I think it's accounting for the economic downturn, and if we have flights that are lost, the other airports will as well. So it'll probably be proportionate.
Okay.
But, and it's pretty. The airlines are adding and taking away flights, especially like here with LA flights. So it's going up and down almost quarterly and changing.
And we're holding our own against, say, Oxnard and the other smaller airports in the area.
Yes.
If we look out a little further, and this is just stretching it a little bit, but if we look out to, say, after the new terminal has been built, have we anticipated an increase in share at that point, or are we just, with all the work that we're doing, we're going to be holding our own in that same 60% range, do you think?
I think that our share will at least remain proportionate or probably increase. The only other airport that I would see that may change is San Luis Obispo in terms of making up the significant loss that they suffered when the airlines made their big changes last fall.
Right, but their activity is significantly less than ours anyway. to
Right,
start with.
right.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Francisco?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I had a question about the workforce reduction. I apologize if I missed this. You talked about eliminating one vacant administrative assistant position in maintenance. And on page G31, on the maintenance page, it shows authorized positions going down by 1.5.
Half of the position is in the facilities maintenance, and the other half is in the airport operations area maintenance on the next page. So that's
Okay.
one full position.
Okay.
We split the salary in 2 places.
And some questions about this, the administrative assistant position. How long has that been vacant?
Yeah, we got it in we added that position in the last budget cycle and had not filled it.
You never filled it.
And just determined as long as we didn't have it filled and we needed to cut that much, we just cut the position.
So why was the position added in the first place?
Pardon? Oh, okay, that's right. We had a maintenance coordinator position that was vacant, and we reclassified it into administrative assistant to give more kind of administrative clerical help to the maintenance supervisor with our work order program, and we're just working around it in order to save the money. If in future budgets, if we are able to make up our revenue, then we may ask for that position back again.
So who's performing those duties?
We have a maintenance worker. One of the maintenance coordinator is spending a lot more of her time than we'd like on the work order system in terms of input of the work orders. And we have another accounting assistant that also assists in that as well, and is helping the maintenance supervisor with clerical needs.
So what kind of impact, I don't know exactly what a maintenance coordinator does, but what is the impact on that person of having to do this other work?
She's not able to be out in the field as much. I mean, her position is not an administrative type position. It's kind of split between administrative and field work. So she's just not out in the field as much, as we would like her to be. And she basically coordinates the work for the day and enters the work orders into the system, issues the work orders to the maintenance workers, and on a daily basis.
So she's basically a field supervisor, and she has less time to supervise because of this.
Right. She's not exactly a supervisor. She's more like a lead, I
Okay.
guess would be a better description.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Williams?
As far as goals for the year, you said completion of 30% of the terminal project. What elements of that, and specifically, does that include the solar project or no?
No, the solar project is separate from the terminal project. We're handling that on a separate track. It will take into account, part of the temporary work that's being done now to set up the building site, and then begin working on the new building. We'll be and getting into, 20% or so of that during the year.
Timeline on the solar project completion?
Well, we're still, our environmental analyst, I guess, is, for lack of a better word, is looking at the kind of the financing mechanisms, and still we're keeping in touch with how to finance the project or put out to a proposal to get, a private party to finance it and operate it. So we aren't letting it go.
Ms. Schneider?
Thank you. I guess my question's more of a longer-term one, but first to congratulate you on selling the bonds last week at such an amazing rate, which, as I understand, reduces our debt service significantly by a couple $1 million, I think.
Yes.
So related to that, when the financing to pay for those bonds were coming from, I believe, the in-plane passenger fees or other things as the backing funding, and so as we move forward with paying back those bonds, are we going to accelerate the payment schedule or just have a lower payment schedule each year? How does that relate to the long-term plan you had for the funding of the bonds? Because you might not need as much, or do we keep that plan in place and use that revenue for other things that are needed at the airport? Have you even looked at that yet? Because it's just been since last week since we sold the bonds, but perhaps you can give us a little update on that.
As far as paying the bonds, the most important, the schedule that we created and the way in which we've worked with the airlines, the big impact would be less fees for the airlines to pay, keeping their rates more modest. Had the interest gone up to the $5 million, it would have really pushed our costs to the airlines way up. At the rate that we have, it's just phenomenal, and it's really, we're very fortunate to have that. I don't know that we would, in the first couple of years, we'll be earning our money in order to start paying our debt service. So it's hard to see what the future is going to hold. We are very optimistic and believe that once we get back up, the economy gets back on track in the next year or so, then our growth will continue doing as it has done for the last 25 years, about 2.5% or 3% a year growth. So it's conceivable that we could prepay, but at this point it's a little early.
Okay. And so it sounds like that having
a lower fee amount to the airlines helps us in being in the competitive market for the size airport that we have in a regional market, which is good for us to have more, as opposed to other airlines saying that the fees are too high to consider Santa Barbara.
That's correct.
Well, that's great news. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Thank you very much. I think we're done. Thank you. So our next one is the waterfront. Do we have people for the airport?
No one asked to
I
speak
didn't-
on the
I didn't
airport
think so.
budget.
Thank you. I didn't have any. Okay, waterfront. Sure, go ahead, Mr. Howe.
Mr. Armstrong, just as they're about to leave there, I just want to ask a quick question. And for the benefit of the public who's watching, the airport is an enterprise fund, and it's supporting itself, sustaining itself, and it actually is generating and holding on to more than the policy reserves that are required by about $600,000 or $700,000 in the coming year. Would you just take a moment and just once again, for whomever's watching, explain the distinction enterprise fund and why that isn't a source of revenue to support us in the general fund area?
Okay, all of the enterprise operations that we have are run as basically as separate business operations of the city. And many of them have very specific legal requirements that you can't take, like if they make a profit, you can't move that money out of their fund and place it into the general fund. Of course, with the airport, the FAA audits us on a regular basis to make sure that all of those revenues stay in that fund. And that's pretty much how we operate the airport fund, the waterfront fund, our water utility, our wastewater utility, the downtown parking operation, and also the Gulf Fund. Especially with the airport, the guidelines are very strict, and there are some cities who have been audited. City of Los Angeles got into a lot of trouble excuse me, with the FAA because they were proposing to fund costs that shouldn't have been funded through their airport revenues. And I think, on the airport itself, they do pay, though, for all of the costs that the city incurs on their behalf. As Karen mentioned, they pay the fire department all of the cost of the fire services that we provide them, but they also pay for a part of the payroll expenses, the HR expenses, all of the finance expenses. We even allocate part of your salaries out to the airport, the city administrator's office, so we do charge them an appropriate level of overhead, but it's all within some pretty specific guidelines that are audited by the federal government.
Thank you very much for taking the time to do that. I really think that's helpful. We get those kinds of questions all the time, and it just helps clarify it. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Bradley and his gang from the waterfront.
Madam Mayor, members, I'm the waterfront director. This afternoon, Scott Reedman, our business manager, will present basically the budget outline, and myself and Carl Treiberg are here to answer any questions or add to that presentation.
Well, good afternoon, Madam Mayor, council members. Scott Reedman, waterfront business manager, just to walk you through the proposed waterfront department fiscal year 2010 operating budget. In terms of the flow of the presentation, we're going to do an overview of the department and staffing levels, organization. Also talk about the budget challenges, of course. Look into our revenues and expenditures for the next fiscal year. And then we will project out using our cash flow pro forma a 6-year projection of where we expect to be and where we expect our reserves to be in 6 years. And then we'll wrap up with some highlights from the performance measurement program. The waterfront department has 46 full-time employees. It's been at that level, I think, since about 2002. We're not anticipating changing that this year. Under the director, we have 3 managers, 6 supervisors, 10 harbor patrol officers, and 26 general employees. In addition to that, we have a significant number of hourly positions in our harbor maintenance program, Stearns Wharf maintenance, harbor patrol, and also parking, the parking services program. We have 9 programs at the Waterfront Department. For example, administration and community relations, property management, financial management, parking services, harbor patrol, marina management, and the facilities division, facilities management. And perhaps this org chart shows that a little bit better. Again, under the director, we have the administrative support and community relations program. Under the 3 division managers, we have the business services division, which is my division, overseeing property management, the property management program, the financial management program, the parking services program. Under Mick Cronman, under the harbor operations division, we have harbor patrol and the marina management program. And under Carl Treiberg, we have the facilities division, which manages the facilities maintenance, again, on the wharf as well as the harbor. And then also the facilities design and capital for our capital improvement plan implementation. Budget challenges for fiscal year 2010 actually start with fiscal year 2009. We have challenges on both the revenue side and the expenditure side, which we'll cover. On the revenue side, we are expecting a revenue shortfall this year on the magnitude of $450,000 to $500,000. That is primarily a shortfall in slip transfer fee revenue. We budgeted $688,000 for that. I believe we've accomplished about $250,000. So that proved to be very volatile in this economic climate. So that's the chief issue. But we're also running a little under in property management program due to the percentage rent leases are a little bit below budget, and also in parking. Annual permit sales are tracking a little bit below expectations, as are Stearns Wharf parking fees collected. So that, in a nutshell, is the revenue side. On the expenditure side, the proposed funding shift to the general fund has been a topic of much discussion at the Harbor Commission level, and probably we'll discuss today again. This consists of waterfront funding the seasonal beach lifeguard program by paying the general fund or Parks and Recreation Department $147,000 a year on an ongoing basis for funding the beach lifeguards. Additionally, the Waterfront Department will take over funding of the 4th of July fireworks to the tune of $55,000 a year, and the waterfront will take over management of 3 restrooms and the Dolphin Fountain. And these restrooms are within the waterfront area. The Ledbetter Beach restroom in the Harbor West parking lot, also the restroom at the base of Stearns Wharf, and the restroom in the Garden Street parking lot next to the Visitor Center. The Visitor Center is also a Waterfront Department tenant, actually. So the restrooms, we anticipated originally about $33,000 to $48,000 to maintain those restrooms. As of today, we've received a proposal from Service Master to do them for $60,000 and change, I believe. So we're looking at a total program shift and funding impact to the waterfront of $250,000 to $260,000 per year on an ongoing basis. So that wraps up the budget challenges. We'll move forward to the revenue trend. If you look at the bottom line there, the actual 2008 revenue received was above budget by about 3%, or about $300,000 at $11.7 million. Usually we do run a little bit above budget in our revenue side. This year is not going to be, that is not going to be the case this year. This year, our amended 2009 budget called for $11.5 million in revenue, and as I mentioned previously, we're going to fall probably $400,000 to $500,000 shy of that goal. So the fiscal year 2010 proposed revenue, it comes to $11.5 million, and we will be proposing some fee adjustments to meet those revenue shortfalls and get back to the $11.5 million number. This graphic shows that same information again, and maybe a little simpler way to understand. You can see our actual fiscal year 08 number at $11.7 million, and then a slight downward trend for the budgeted amended budget for fiscal year 09 at 11.5, and then our projected fiscal year 09 at 11.1 million, and then finally with the fee adjustments, we hope to get back to the 11.5 million figure. Like the airport department, the waterfront department is an enterprise fund, meaning we don't receive any tax revenues, which actually in this budget climate is probably a good thing. This graphic just shows the three main revenue generating programs that we have. The property management program at $4.1 million, or 36% of our operating budget. The marina management program at $4.8 million, or 42% of our operating budget. And the parking services program at $2.1 million, or 19% of our budget. So again, altogether for fiscal year 2010, with the proposed fee increases, we're anticipating $11.5 million in revenue. Moving on to the expenditure side of the operating budget, we do anticipate a reduction of $462,000 fiscal year 2010 compared to fiscal year 2009. For the most part, about $84,000 of that is in hourly staffing position reductions, $78,000 reduction in maintenance costs, and $126,000 in equipment costs reduced. And that is for equipment for harbor patrol, parking, and also, like many city departments, we are deferring virtually all computer replacement this next fiscal year. Similarly, the general fund lowered the ICS and allocated costs to the general fund, and the enterprises were able to share in that savings. So that's $159,000, and that's how we get to the proposed reduction of $462,000 in our operating budget. Again, this graphic just shows where the money goes. The 2010 budgeted expenditures of $10.8 million. Salaries and benefits is about 51% of that amount at $5.5 million. Supplies and services, $3.3 million, or 31%. And then the third largest is our debt service at about $1.6 million. And that consists of about $200,000 in loans from the general fund, and the balance, about $1.3 million, is our 2002 bond issue. That's the debt service on our 2002 bond issue. So we have a three-phased approach to the budget strategy for this year. As I just mentioned, the $462,000 in operating fund budget cuts. In addition, we're recommending capital program cuts and reductions in the amount of $170,000, and I'll outline those after this slide. And we're also looking at a menu of fee increases, potential fee increases, equating to $719,000 in additional revenue to make up for the shortfall that we expect to see, and also for the funding shift. So as I mentioned, in the capital improvement program, we are expecting to reduce marina capital improvements by $25,000 to $225,000. Stearns Wharf pile driving contract, $50,000 reduction to $300,000, and we're eliminating the Navy Pier timber replacement of $80,000. So that's $155,000 of the $170,000 that we're recommending. Additionally, we've been able to realize a savings, we believe, on the replacement of the video security system, so that gets us to the $170,000 in cuts. I would like to draw your attention to the last two rows of the CIP there, in italics. The launch ramp concrete design for $75,000. That would be under a grant from the State Department of Boating and Waterways, which we've applied for. And $2.5 million for the Marina One walkway replacement project, which we have applied for a loan from the State Department of Boating and Waterways. And these projects will go forward if and only if we do receive that funding. Otherwise, we would not be able to undertake these projects. So, on to the recommended fee increases. The hourly parking fee is scheduled to increase from $1.50 to $2. The last time this fee was increased was in 2003. It was increased from $1 to $1.50 an hour at that time. At that time, we programmed into our cash flow analysis that we would go to $2 in 2010. And of course, in 2003, 2010 seemed like a long time from then. Well, it's upon us now, and it's time to adjust that fee. Additionally, given the circumstances, we're recommending increasing the Stearns Wharf parking fee from $2 to $2.50. We're leaving the 90-minute validation alone, so tenants can still get patrons can still get a merchant validation for the 90 minutes. We did discuss this at several Wharf Association meetings, and most of the tenants, all but one, were okay with this increase as long as we didn't mess with the validation. They really like the validation. Additionally, we were recommending increasing the honor lot parking fee from $2 for 3 hours to $3 for 3 hours. The slip transfer fee from $25 a foot to, that will bring it up from $225 to $250 a foot now, except for 20-foot slips, which will remain the same. Slip fee increase of 4%, and a 50% visitor slip fee increase from 60 cents to 90 cents a foot a night, except for commercial fishing vessels, which will be increased from 60 to only 70 cents a foot a night. And we did our annual marina fee survey and found that our visitor slip fees are well below other comparable harbors, and so we believe this is an easy fee to increase. So what does that mean in terms of the amount of revenue anticipated? We anticipate receiving $223,000 in the hourly parking fees, $49,000 from the fees on Stearns Wharf, $75,000 from the honor fee parking lots, and $182,000 from the visitor slip fee increase. So what I've done here is put a subtotal of the visitor fee. Subtotal of the visitor fees is $529,000. So $529,000 of the total $719,000 of proposed fee increases. Basically, the visitors will bear the burden of those fee increases. Visitors that park in our hourly parking lots, visitors to the wharf, folks that don't have the annual parking permit, which we're not proposing to increase the fees on, and then also visitor slip fees. So in terms of the fees that will affect the resident permanent slip permittees will be the 4%, or excuse me, the $25 slip transfer fee of $50,000 and the 4% slip fee, which will equate to $140,000 in revenue. So again, $190,000 to be borne by the slip permittees and $529,000 to be borne by visitors. We have some other minor fee adjustments, mostly administrative type fee adjustments. For instance, our meeting room rentals for the Marine Center classroom are proposing to go from $25 an hour to $50 an hour for commercial and for-profit uses. Non-profit ocean-related groups will still be able to use the room for minimal fees or ask to have the fee waived entirely, so no changes there. The City Pier wharfage and dockage fee will go from 40 cents a foot to 50 cents a foot per tie-up. That's when commercial vessels come in and tie up at the City Pier there in front of Brophy's. An administrative processing fee from 25 to 50. Our all-day maximum parking fee for hourly parking will go from $9 to $12 for the maximum all-day fee. And the maximum all-day trailer parking fee will go from $6 to $8. And then finally, we manage a dozen charter permits, enables people to charter out of the marinas. They've been $100 a year forever, so we're proposing to increase those to $250 a year. So again, to summarize, the fiscal year 2009 amended budget shows a net gain on the bottom row there of $423,000, which, as I mentioned, we will not realize that this year. That'll probably be close to zero, maybe even less. The fiscal year 2010 proposed budget will have a net gain of $700,000 if all goes according to plan, and that net gain goes into our reserve funds for funding capital improvement projects. So we use a 6-year model of revenue and expenditures to map out the next 6 years to estimate what our reserves will be at the end of that time period. This pro forma spreadsheet has some assumptions that we'll go over. It assumes a revenue growth of 1% in 2011 and 2% thereafter for things like property management income, parking income, and so forth. The slip transfer fee, we intend to continue the $25 per foot per year increase, except for on the smaller slips. We've probably about maxed out on, we have maxed out on the 20-footers. We'll probably take the 25s out here in the next year or so. And then the slip fee increase, 4% for 2010. We're proposing, well, this isn't part of the budget, but as part of our pro forma, 4% in 2011 and 3% in 2012. And 2% a year thereafter, which is our normal sort of slip fee forecast. We're also assuming an expense growth of 2.5 to 3% per year in things like salaries and benefits and supplies and services, and capital program cuts from 2011 to 2015 of another $595,000 in cuts to the capital program. Under this model, it does appear we will be able to maintain our reserves at the required levels. Our operating reserves at 25% of our operating budget, and the Harbor Preservation Fund, which must be maintained above $2 million per the municipal code. So this cash flow model does show us that we can maintain our reserves as long as we make the fee increases, and we can pay for that funding shift in this fashion. We did have 4 meetings basically with elements of the Harbor Commission. We started with the Harbor Commission Budget Committee on February 17th. The Budget Committee is Commissioner Watson and Chairman Frank Kelly. We did an overview of these issues, fee increases, potential funding shift, and so forth. That was a publicly noticed meeting at the Waterfront Department offices. We also brought the budget to the full commission in February 26th, March 19th, and April 16th. So we had 3 hearings before the full board before we got here today. The Harbor Commission's recommendation, which will have the staff recommendation at the end, but the Harbor Commission's recommendation after this series of meetings is the following. The Commission moved to strongly recommend to the City Council that funding program shifts to the waterfront enterprise not be used as a budget balancing strategy due to negative impact on visitors, residents, and harbor users. The second motion was moved to recommend an alternative to the proposed funding shift as follows. Allow the waterfront to privatize landscaping services currently which are simply paid to the Parks and Recreation Department to provide those services. Assume the responsibility for the 3 additional restrooms maintenance and repair. So there was agreement on that. Pay 50% of the 4th of July costs. And decline Waterfront Department funding of seasonal beach lifeguard program. That was the Harbor Commission's recommendation. Moving on to the performance measurement program, the P3 program highlights. In the parking program, one of the measures is to maintain annual operating expense below 53% of revenue collected. In other words, every dollar of revenue collected, 53 cents goes to expense and 47 goes to the department. Harbor Patrol coordinate 2 emergency response drills with the fire department to reinforce joint tactical response procedures. And in the Marina Management Program, prepare an annual marina fee survey prior to the budget submittal. In the maintenance program in the harbor, rebuild 10 marina slip fingers in Marina 2 is the goal for fiscal year 2010. In the facilities design and capital improvement program, one of the goals is to reduce natural gas usage by installing a solar thermal unit on the Marina 4 restroom and soon to be revamped laundry facility. And in the administration and community relations program, that program is responsible for ensuring that 85% of the department program objectives are met. We'll just wrap up with some of our current fiscal year 09 program achievements. In the parking program, we completed the installation of an honor fee collection lot system in the Palm Park parking lot. Harbor Patrol officers were equipped and trained with tasers, a non-lethal stun gun. The Marina Management Program began building a database for a reverse 911 system specific to the waterfront marina users and tenants. We had an electrical fire in Marina 1 which knocked out the electricity for a few days, and we had an urgent need to get a hold of everybody and had to do it manually. So this system will come in handy. We're cooperating with the county on establishing that. In terms of facilities maintenance in the harbor, they did accomplish redecking 8 marina slip fingers in Marina 2 on time and under budget, in-house rather than contracting it out. Facilities and capital design redecked the city pier on time and under budget as part or concurrently with our wharf pile driving project. But the bid climate is so good right now, we're able to do that this year rather than next year. Hence, you see that program being eliminated in the capital fund for next year. And administration and community relations, this does not appear in your budget book because it's so recent. We got approval of Cal Boating construction loan for Marina One of an additional $4.4 million. As you may recall, we were quite disappointed, or $4.8 million. We were quite disappointed in last year when we went up to Sacramento and they approved a $6 million loan but only funded $730,000. So this is a big deal for us. And the other thing that was critical was at the 11th hour, the Department of Boating and Waterways would not subordinate their loan to our certificates of participation, our bonds, which is a deal breaker, which we weren't informed after working for this on 2 years. We were kind of sandbagged on that one. So we went to the commission and they approved to subordinate the loan to our COPS. So that was huge for us too. So assuming the check clears,
Right.
we'll
Careful.
Okay. Okay, so the staff recommendation before you today is a one-year budget recommendation just for fiscal year 2010 with operating fund reductions of $462,000, reduction in the capital program, as I outlined, of $170,000, fee increases of approximately $719,000, and the ongoing program and funding shift of some programs to waterfront and other funds to the general fund of $250,000 to $260,000. And should the economy markedly improve, we can certainly revisit, as always, some of these proposed fees next year as part of next year's budget process. And that concludes my part of the presentation. I believe John Bridley may have a word or two he'd like to add, and then we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Bradley?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, Scott, as always, did a great job of outlining the issues for you. Both to his credit and Carl's, the recent approval for the Cal Boating loan is significant for us. As you know, we've been waiting for almost 2 years to implement that project. It's out to bid. In fact, bids are due tomorrow. Unfortunately, that will add some debt service if we have to service the loan. The good news is the way this loan is structured, it's structured as like a bank, or not a bank, a home equity loan. So we only pay as we draw the money. So the phases of the project are still implementable for us. We can do the first phase, only pay on the debt, get ready, and then rebid the second phase. So that covers hopefully the first 3 or 4 phases of the project. So I want to acknowledge both Carl and Scott for their efforts there. and want you to at least know that that project is on the drawing board for next year. And I know there are two of our harbor commissioners that are here today. I don't know if they plan to speak, but I wanted to acknowledge them as they have gone over this budget 2 or 3 meetings. So I wanted them also to be acknowledged for the work that we put in.
Thank you. And I see Betsy Kramer here and Charlie Watson. Okay, thank you very much. Good presentation. I wanted to ask a couple questions. The Navy Pier, the Navy pilings, I saw we're going to eliminate those, but don't we need them? Or what's, yeah.
Madam Mayor, the Navy Pier, also known as the City Pier, is the one in front of Brophy's. And I guess I wasn't clear on that. We were able to do the redecking this year rather than next year.
Oh, the redecking, but that includes the piles.
We replaced a few piles that were necessary, but for the most part, the piles were in better than we expected.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it would be hard to do a deck without the pilings. Thank you. Sometimes. Okay, we have 4 people who would like to speak. Do you have any questions? Okay. Well, I started with you last time, but that's okay. Ms. Falcone and then Mr. Horton.
Okay, thank you. Couple of quick questions, actually. In a prior iteration of the shift, the components of the funding shift, there was beach grooming that was also on there. I don't see that anymore. Did it go away, or was that just a discussion item? I mean, you picked up fireworks and lost beach grooming, which is...
It was just one of the items that was discussed, but it's never been something we've recommended to the council.
Okay, so that stays with parks then?
Yeah. Well, and one of the reasons for that is we felt that the lifeguard program was, I guess it was a more discrete program that we could identify, and that the costs were real clear, and there weren't a lot of overhead issues and other things that kind of complicated the issue.
Okay. In terms of just the legalities of something like this, and I know we've been doing, as you said, the landscaping for maybe 2 years, a year and a half or something, but I guess my question is for Mr. Vincent, how is an enterprise zone, in this case the waterfront, paying the Parks Department or proposing to pay for a Parks Department function of lifeguards? Isn't that enterprise fund money going for a general fund purpose? I mean, if you dissect it down, isn't that what is prohibited with respect to how enterprise fund monies are spent?
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Falcone, the answer to your question really as you say, gets down to what is the enterprise function. Mm-hmm. And the lifeguards are working in the waterfront area. They are the people who are using the waterfront, the ocean, the harbor. It really is, I think that it falls within that function of the waterfront. Has it been done that way historically? No. The Parks Department has been doing the lifeguarding, but I don't believe it is outside the scope of the waterfront's function to service both the residents and the visitors who come to the waterfront in that area.
I understand the explanation. I'm particularly not moved.
Fair. The other part of the answer to your question is the same example as the airport, where in that case the fire department provides fire services to assist the airport in their airport functions. In this case, now, in this example, the lifeguards are out there. They're providing services by the Parks Department, but they're serving an area of the city that is the waterfront. In this case, now, the Waterfront Department will be paying for those functions.
All right, those are my questions. Thank you.
And I might add that this arrangement of having a waterfront operation pay for lifeguard services in a waterfront area is not unusual in California. There's other cities, Newport Beach comes to mind, where that's one of the functions, and it's not unusual at all to have that function paid for by a water. But basically, it's governed by the state Tidelands Trust. The agreement we have with them, and this is clearly permittable under that.
Is Newport Beach waterfront, are they an enterprise fund?
That's my understanding.
They are?
Mr. Horton?
John or Scott, just about 4 questions here, and I'll just read them off, and you can respond or tell me you get the answers later. On page G373, your hours lost to injury went from 0 to 410. I'd just like to know why. On G375, the trades and transfers items went up from 90 to 150. I thought when we talked in a previous iteration, your transfers were actually flat or going down, so that I didn't get. On page G377, the lost hours to injury jump almost doubles, which again I don't understand. And then on the capital projects completed within budget at 70%, I'd like to see that at maybe 99% rather than 70. So that's my questions.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Horton, on G373, the lost time hours due to injury in the Harbor Patrol, 410 is basically what we've allocated or, in a sense, budgeted as the level. There were no lost time hours in fiscal year 2008, and we haven't experienced any in fiscal year 2009. If you were looking at the budgeted number for fiscal year 2009 instead of the actual or the projected there, it would probably be closer to the 410 figure.
And if I might add, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Horton, typically when we have an injury in patrol, it has averaged around 400. It's not planned that we're going to have an injury, but if we did, that's what we would expect. So like Scott said, that's an allocated number. It's really good to report to you for the last 2 years we've had no injuries, and so we've had 0 lost work hours.
And I just, to the waterfront's credit, they've had a phenomenal reduction in lost time injuries the last few years, but we do need to assume there will be some injuries. Hopefully there won't be any, but they've really come a long ways in the last few years.
On 375, the number of trades, transfers, permits, or assignment process going from projected in 90 to proposed in 2010, that's probably a little aggressive at 150 given the circumstances. We probably derived that number before we realized the full magnitude of the impact to the slip transfer. And I'm sorry, was there something on 377 as well? Oh, okay. Okay, does that answer your questions?
I'm sorry, the answer would be the same. That's just an allocated, that's kind of our historic based on, I think it's the facilities division, if I remember right. We've had some injuries there this year, but certainly a reduction over the last several years.
Okay, Mr.
And I think the other one on capital projects, I'll let Carl respond. We'd like to see that 99, but that may be an unrealistic goal.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Horton, those are referring to our minor capital improvement projects that we manage ourselves, not manage jointly with the Public Works program. So they're smaller in nature. There's about 35 a year, and we will endeavor to achieve more than 70%. It appears to be a bit of a challenge, but we're trying.
Thank you. Mr. Williams?
Scott, one other topic of conversation has been the general fund loans to the waterfront. One, I believe, is there 2 loans, and one of which has interest and one of which does not have interest attached to it? And what's the principle of the loan that has no interest?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Williams, there are 2 loans. One is a $100,000 principal-only payment each year. That was for, I believe, storm damage to the wharf. No? Okay.
It was initial seed money that was given to the waterfront department back in 1980, believe it or not, when the wharf was first opened and the department was first created. It gave them the opportunity to begin exploring what it would take to renovate the wharf. We got some Coastal Conservancy grants and loans at that time, which have subsequently been either grants obviously spent or paid off. Way before our time relative to why it was structured as a non-interest loan. I couldn't answer that question.
Oh, no, I meant the principal, like the balance. I'm not expecting you guys to go that far back, but what's the balance of the principal? This is not an ideological question.
Mm-hmm.
The financial one.
The remaining balance is $1,000,001.
And so what would be the interest on that if it was, say, the same interest rate as our other loan to the waterfront per year?
The other loan, I think, is the loan that was given to us for reconstructing the Chandlery building and our administrative offices. And I believe it bears an interest rate equal to what your investment rate is, but I think it's 6.5% at this time.
And what would be the additional payment if we had to, if the waterfront had to pay that?
Somewhere around $60,000 a year.
65,000. Okay. All right. Just wanted that information. I guess I'm just, I think we are obviously having to juggle a lot of things. And I think there's some. I guess I'm just going to throw this out there before public comment as an idea. The parking revenue that the waterfront receives is about $2.158 million. The expense to get that revenue is about $0.922 million, for the total profit or revenue of $1.23 million. Is that wrong? That's the stuff on G371.
It doesn't include the like the landscape maintenance costs that are part of that. It doesn't include
I'm getting to that. Don't worry. I'm just sort of establishing as a principle out there that, to me, anything that helps get people to those parking lots is something that we could use some of that parking lot revenue for and legitimately use it, because that's the reason why we're getting people to those parking lots. And that's why I feel like landscape maintenance is okay, and things that bring people to the wharf, that's very legitimate. I even think that beach lifeguards may be legitimate, but I'm definitely willing to look at that one piece a little bit harder, and I might be convinced to exchange that for the interest on the loan, adding an interest payment onto the loan if we can get there financially. So I'm just going to throw out the idea of that swap being put into our look at later stuff, because that would essentially have the amount that you would have to say add to the slip percentage increase. So I'm just going to throw that out there as a possible idea to look at.
Okay. Mr. House?
Okay, just a couple of quick questions here. The parking lots that are below Santa Barbara City College, how do we, is that included in any of this fee increase recommendation, or what's that arrangement there, and what kind of source of revenue is that for us?
Madam Mayor, Council,
or I should say source of additional revenue for us, because we have some agreement, don't we, that we're paid by City College?
Yes, Councilmember House, we have a joint powers agreement dating from 1962 with the City College in old Spanish days and the city waterfront department. Actually, Parks and Rec is in there too. Joint use of the La Playa lots across Cabrillo Boulevard, Shoreline Drive, actually at that point, and then our Ledbetter lot and the Harbor West lot. So it's a reciprocal agreement where the City College faculty, students, and staff can use our lots during the school year, and we can utilize the La Playas during the summer. But we generate very little revenue from using those La Playa lots, probably to the tune of $15,000, $18,000 a year for both of those lots.
Oh, really? I see. I know that City College Adult Ed is going to be adding fees for use of parking by the City College, continuing education students in the lots at Schott, Wake Center, and also the ones that are at City College. So they're addressing an issue of revenue to begin to make those charges. So I just wondered if there's any opportunity there for us as well. The honor fee lots on G 363, it suggests that that there may be a loss of revenue by going to honor fee. I didn't think that was so. Can you talk to us about that a little bit? If we're by shifting to the honor fee approach, is it revenue neutral? Do we lose money, or is there a chance for it to do well? It was just in the text there in the in consideration of service impacts.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember House, we are very concerned with raising any and all of the parking fees that we may begin to turn away people, which would have a disastrous effect on our percentage rent revenue. So we're concerned about hitting that tipping point with the parking fees on the wharf, in the hourly lots, as well as the honor fee lots. So when we did those revenue forecasts, we projected a 10% fall off rate, attrition rate. So we didn't budget that out the full amount.
Okay. That wasn't due to the shift to honor fee. That was due to the increase in the rate.
Increase in the rate, correct.
Right. And then over time, you might expect it to start to come back up as time goes on.
Yes.
Okay. And then the last thing is you mentioned that you do your annual survey of the marina rates, the rates for slip fees and that kind of thing. I see that you may have a slide prepared to cover that with us. I would like to see where we stand in terms of our rates, if you have that information for us, and how close to the center we are in terms of our charges, or whether we're way out of kilter one way or another. If you could take a few minutes with us, I'd appreciate that.
Yes, typically Santa Barbara's rates fall well below the comparable marinas, especially in Ventura and Channel Islands. Those are clustered Ventura Isle, Ventura West, and Ventura Harbor Village near the top of the spreadsheet. It's a little hard to read. But typically we do fall well below those marinas. Also the marinas in Channel Islands Landing, Vintage Marina, Anacapa Isle, and Bahia Cabrillo, and Peninsula Yacht Marina. I believe they have 5 down there. Those are privately operated marinas, and typically privately operated marinas charge much higher rates than publicly operated marinas, and certainly much higher than Santa Barbara. So we believe we have elasticity in the slip fees to increase them before we would see any kind of vacancy issues arise.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember House, in fairness, just to explain the difference between a privately run marina and a publicly run marina. First of all, the service charges may not be included. In other words, our slip holders need to buy a parking permit. That's about $100. Well, not for slip holders. It's about $85 a year. So there are services that are provided that are not shown. Same thing with possessory interest tax charges. The private marina, as holding a long-term lease, will be charged a possessory interest tax. He will factor that tax into his slip rate. We, as a publicly run marina, do not get charged a possessory interest tax, but our boaters pay those individually. So when you look at some of these, when you compare a private marina to a public marina, there is a difference relative to the actual fee rate. So I'd like you to take that into consideration. You're not comparing an apple to an orange exactly with this slip fee comparison study.
Mr. Bradley, if I may. So given those factors that you just talked about, how do you feel that, I mean, like if somebody were looking for another place to go because of these increases that are being proposed, how do we compare all those factors considered for those who are using our harbor currently?
Councilmember House, we would still be below. We've actually added what we believe to be the average possessory interest tax amount to our slip fee on a monthly basis, and then we've done the same if you prorate the parking fee that also you really got to have in order to park. And I think we are still below the market relative to the comparison, but it begins to close the gap.
Okay, and then the last piece of that is we haven't included in any of our current recommended increases what we would need to do if we had to bear the full cost of the dredge or some of these other, those kinds of additional costs that are sort of uncertainties, aren't they, on the horizon with regards to the federal government's participation. Maybe you comment on that a little bit for us.
A good question. No, there's no slip fee analysis or comparison or projection that would include us having to pick up the cost of the federal dredging. The federal dredging, as you know, is now close to $2 million annually. If we had to bear the cost of that total $2 million, the slip rates would fall off the chart and would be difficult. In fact, I don't think we could do that. It wouldn't be fair. The department would have to find a different mechanism to do that. The only thing I can say about the federal dredging is it's an annual decision. I'd like to tell you that we could have comfort for 2 or 3 years or 5 years going forward, but that's not the way the federal government works. It's not the way they approve the Corps of Engineer budget. That's why we have a lobbyist that work for the Waterfront Department to make sure that they're keeping their finger on the pulse as to what the wins are for funding small craft harbors, which unfortunately are the first to go when funding difficulties come. The good news is we're currently in the federal budget for this year. We got full funding for we're done with our dredging cycle for this year, and it looks like we'll be in the federal budget for next year, which starts October 1st. The budget's not adopted yet, unfortunately, so we won't know that till October. But once it's included by the President's draft, it's much easier than if it's not, and we have to ask to get it in. So I feel comfortable for next year, but we'll go through that same drill again next year.
We get so many questions about this, and so I think I took from what you said that if we had something like a major hit called we somehow had to bear the full cost of the dredging to keep our harbor open, we would really, as a city, have to find some other way to deal with that, because you couldn't put that on the backs of the slip holders.
That's correct.
The holder and leaseholders, too. Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, we have some people from the public who would like to speak. Grant Castleberg. Same name, different last name, and followed by Charlie Watson.
Castle.
Yeah.
Grant Castleberg, and
Yeah.
my wife and I have had sailboats in the harbor for about 30 years, and we're happy to pay the slip fees. We're not so happy to have slip fees, and if that money goes to other departments. So I would urge council to remove those items where some of the revenue goes towards other departments that I think should be appropriately under Parks and Recreation. Thank you.
Thank you. Charlie Watson, followed by Scott Burns.
Madam Mayor and council members, I'm a vice chair of the Harbor Commission, as you know. Commissioner Kelly, our chairman, was unable to be here today because he's out of the country. I am speaking as an individual because I don't think I've been authorized by the commission to speak on their behalf. But I do want to explain to you my grave concern over the idea of this fund transfer for items and issues that are not related to our mission. And our mission is pretty well spelled out, and it doesn't include lifeguarding. However, the Parks Department's mission statement does include that kind of activity. And lifeguarding serves the public in general, and it serves the visitors that come to Santa Barbara who pay the bed tax that helps run the city. So we feel strongly that, or I feel strongly, that this sort of violates the concept of the enterprise zone. Even though it may be legal, I don't think it's right, because that activity does not support our mission, or our mission does not support that particular life-saving activity. We don't station lifeguards in the harbor at West Beach. They are placed at East Beach and Ledbetter Beach, where the general public come, and our life-saving capacity in the harbor is covered by our harbor patrol. So that's basically the way I see it. With respect to the fund transfer with the landscape maintenance, I think that's appropriate. In fact, I believe I either made the motion, or I definitely voted for the motion in the last budget, or 2 years ago when we accepted those responsibilities, because I could see the nexus. We are getting benefit of the revenue from those parking lots. It's only proper that we pay for the landscaping, but that's where I diverge from the way we're doing it. We're giving $230,000 a year to the park department to maintain this landscaping on our parking lots, and we can do it cheaper. And so we want it back. We want to stop sending the $250,000 to the park department. We want to keep it, and we want to spend it ourselves, either by doing that with our own staff or with outsourcing it, because we know we can do it cheaper and we can have better control over the way that money is spent. And so I feel really strongly, in case I haven't given that impression. So I think I've covered both of those. And it's also been pointed out that about the pending problems that we have. The dredging costs have been already discussed. The other that concerns me is the waterfront's share of the unfunded pension liability, and we don't know what that amount is. We have no way to plan for it, And I just wonder, what's the game plan on that thing? Because it's going to come, and that's one of the reasons that that we want to not max out our slip rents and fees until we have to, because that's the only source that we haven't tapped to its maximum as of now. So those are my concerns, and I wanted to share them with you. And thank you for hearing me.
Thank you. Mr. Burns will be followed by Lori Rafferty.
I think Mr. Burns had to leave, but he wrote a note there on his
He says,
speakers.
thank you. I support funds from the harbor to maintain restrooms at the base of Stearns Wharf, and I am attending a teen council meeting at 4:15. So that's where he is. Lori Rafferty will be followed by Gary Longenberger.
Hello, and here we are again. I have to say I have a problem with that slip comparison chart. I've seen that up there before, and to me, as a boat owner since 1985, that chart is like comparing apples and oranges, private to public. I can take you down to Ventura and show you what nice facilities they have down there. In fact, for us to afford Santa Barbara in 1985, we had to be in Ventura for several years before we could afford to move up here. You have access to your boat. You have ample parking. It's clean. You have modern docking facilities. So please, let's not compare apples and oranges to that. But what I really wanted to get at was this whole thing, and I know you're going to see it over and over again. This is like robbing Peter to pay Paul. And boat owners are not a cash cow. I really represent a cross-reference of families, working families in Santa Barbara that have owned boats for a long time. I mean, you have your standout celebrities that are have boats down there. They have multiple slips, multiple boats. But that is not reality. And we just had a slip increase last year or a couple of years ago. But these are the reasons why I cannot support this. Please tell me, what does owning a boat have to do with lifeguarding? What does owning a boat have to do with 4th of July, cleaning waterfront bathrooms that we don't use, and waterfront parking? You have to look at who uses that stuff. I still question the nice budget presentation here about why they're still full steam ahead about all these capital improvement projects. Hey, I would have liked to have had a nice remodeled bathroom this year. It's not going to happen. We had a lot of capital improvement projects in our family business. These are not economic times to do full steam ahead projects with this. I'm a Marina One slip owner, and you know what? We can wait when the times are better. I'm looking at the nice pie chart up here at the end of the presentation, and it appears that slip fees seem to be taking a disproportionate share in the budget recommendations. Again, that gets back to robbing Peter to pay Paul. Maybe you should look at the pie chart where clearly it shows the salaries and benefit fees. They're over half of the waterfront budget. Have those been touched? I would like to see that. And common sense really tells us in these economic times that these are just not good situations to keep spending and spending. So in conclusion, I don't support raising slip fees over 11% over the next 3 budget cycles. And I think there's some work to do on this budget. I know it's hard, I know it's challenging, but everybody's got to have their fair share. And 11% is a lot for a lot of families. Thank you.
Thank you. Gary Longenberger, followed by Rick DeSant, and the last one will be Ed. Ed Menners.
Madam Mayor, City Council members, there's been a misunderstanding. The majority of the boat owners are not rich. Go down, take a look, go down to the harbor. You'll see the majority of the boats are around 20 to 25 years old. As everybody is taking a hit, everybody's been affected by the economy, and so have the boat owners. And as a fact, you're seeing more boats and slips on the market that aren't selling, which is cutting back on the amount of income that the waterfront department is making. Now add to this the fact that the liveaboards are at the bottom of the rung. They don't make enough money to buy a house or a condo, which is pretty expensive. And now they were hit a couple of years ago with a 40% increase. And now if you look at these figures, you'll be looking in 3 years at a 51% increase on the liveaboards. What you're going to see are more liveaboards forced to put their boat or put their slip on the market, move out to the anchorage, then with the next big storm end up on the beach in the city spending the money to have that boat salvaged and one more homeless person out there trying to get by. The point I want to make here is that the harbor has been the most continually neglected part of Santa Barbara and this county. And what you're doing here is going to add to that scenario. You got the breakwater wall, over 70 years old. You've got buildings there dating back to World War II, so over 50 years old. You got old wooden docks. Now you've got a dredge situation, as John told you. We're going to be right back here in front of you. If we've got an issue with the federal government and a big deficit, if that dredge does not get funded for the $1 million plus, we're going to be right here in front of you going, what were you thinking? We can't afford this and this. The other point is that this harbor sits on an earthquake fault. You get a big earthquake, you've got another major problem. So now you're going to take $595,000 of the waterfront department on top of the $170,000 already, and you're going to put this into Parks and Rec and the beaches, etc. Well, you know what you're going to have? You're going to have the public safety jeopardized. And as a result, you're going to see heavy litigation and lawsuits because of it. So, and you know, that alone can bury this city and any official looking for re-election or higher office. Okay.
Could you wind up, please?
Yes, let me wind this up for you. Just briefly, I'd like to come in with an answer to the situation that there are a number of people here that do not live in Santa Barbara, that live out of the county, live out of the state, that you look to giving a discount to liveaboards and people that live here and put these fees on those that don't pay the fees, don't pay the taxes, etc. for living here. And I would ask that you look at that. And in conclusion, whatever happened to the idea to appropriate user fees, like the bed tax, that the people, the tourists that are going to use these beaches are the ones that pay for it. Well, what happened to that idea? Well, that gets sucked into the general fund. So what about the boaters? Well, the boaters don't use the beaches, they don't use the lifeguards, and they don't use the bathrooms, and yeah, the dolphin pound looks great, but why should we fund it? So the point is that you're putting the beaches on the backs of the boaters, and it's not even an appropriate user fee, like a bed tax. So the point I'm trying to make, no taxation without user representation. Thank you.
Thank you. Rick Dissent, followed by Ed Minners, I think.
Good afternoon, Mayor, City Council members. I'm here to voice my opinion against the proposed slip fee increase. As a slip holder for the last 17 years and a liveaboard for most of that time, I'm very concerned about the constant increase in slip and liveaboard fees, especially with the state of the economy. Come on. I just lost my job a month ago because of the economy. And a few years ago, they increased our liveaboard fees 40%, which they should have spread across the whole harbor. Instead of just hit our liveaboards, they could have did maybe a 1% increase over the whole harbor instead of hit us for 40%. And I know now with the slip fee increase, there's going to be a liveaboard increase is right around the corner. I know it's going to happen. And so anyway, I haven't noticed any improvement to our facilities. We still share our bathroom and showers with everybody and their brother in the city that come down there, trash them, and I see it every morning. I could not explain to you some of the things I've seen in our showers and stuff down there. It gets really bad. So I don't think we should be paying for all of this other stuff that the tourists use on the beaches, all the bathrooms and the fountains and whatever. That has no bearing on us boat owners. It's ridiculous. I mean, we pay for what the harbor needs. You know, we shouldn't pay for what the tourists are enjoying, which is some of the other facilities on the beach front. So anyway, I'm totally against this. It's a bad time to increase slip fees with this economic turndown, and I'm personally hit by it. So thank you.
Thank you. Ed Minners.
Hello, everyone. How much time do I get to?
We usually do 2 minutes or
Okay,
less.
well, anyway. Well, I'll tell you, it's a good thing I didn't speak to you guys in the middle of the night last night. I work at night. And, you know, this entire damn thing, you know, I live a good life. I work for a living. I work an honest job. I don't give the Harbor Patrol any crap. I try to be good to everybody. I've taken a reduction in pay. I smiled about that because I have a good employer. I understand it. They're giving away my overtime, and I'm going to have to work for 7 days. I'm going to look for 2 more days, so I work 7 days. I'm an American. I'm a Californian. I'm a born Californian, and I'm getting treated like you would treat a goddamn Indian chasing him around on the desert. You're routing me up. You're taking my money. You're degrading.
If you will, please, just, we have not decided anything up here yet. We're just looking at a budget, and we're trying to figure out what's the best thing to do about it.
I'm
and if
sorry,
you can
you
just
know-
address it. I know you're having a hard time, but so are other people too. But what we want to do is have a really good budget, and we're trying to do it in the smartest way possible.
I understand.
Please.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Okay.
I understand.
You know, I spent a lot
What
of
would
time
be
on
helpful is, from your comments thus far, I don't know whether you're a waterfront employee and
Oh,
losing your
I'm
job,
sorry. I'm a liveaboard.
or whether you're
a liveaboard in the
okay.
harbor.
Okay, thank you.
And
That's what we need to
you
know.
know, okay, I'm sorry,
No,
but
that's okay.
just
We
so
just need
just
to
so you
know. I
understand the real situation here.
Yeah.
You know, I don't have any problem. I know we got to have taxes. I know we got to have laws. You know, the dogs can't go on the docks. You got to have a leash on the dog. You know, I know all this stuff, but you know, the transfer fees have gone. I mean, the transfer fees on my slip are now more than I paid for the slip. I didn't come there to make money on buying slips and boats and selling them. Nobody does. You don't do that. The consequences of the buying and selling of the boats was just a natural thing. I don't want to leave here. You know, I don't, and I want to live a good life. I want a healthy life. But I know I can live a healthy life. I eat really healthy food. I do my stretching. You know, I drink water. But look at, you know, the general public doesn't have to pay for the marina. I pay for this. And I pay for this. I pay for this building. I'm the taxpayer. You know, and you can laugh at my income. I put out 7.8% of my income to fight that corrupt government we had in Washington, D.C. And I know a lot of you feel that way. And I pay 4% out to animal activists of my income every year. So I'm not just here for myself. There's a principle here. I don't want to pay. I think if you charge people for directly what they're using, things will clear up. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
I know, I'm just smiling because we all pay for this building. It's, you know, but I understand what you're saying. It's not easy out there. Okay, anybody else? I don't have any other slips. Okay, anybody from the council? Okay, Ms. Schneider, and then Mr. Williams. Sure.
Thank you for coming and speaking, and I think the rest of the council will attest this is one of the hot topics of emails that we've received over the last several months. So the representation in terms of public speaking wasn't there, but I know there's been a lot of conversation and correspondence to us as well. So this has been a big topic. I have a couple of questions before I just want to bring up some ideas, and some have been bantied around already. The property revenue portion of the pie chart was $4.1 million. Do you have the breakdown between how much of that comes from Stearns Wharf versus the harbor area?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Schneider, I do, but not with me. But I can certainly provide you with, we break it out in wharf and harbor.
Okay. Do you have like a general half and half, 60-40? Or do you want to? I mean, a significant portion is coming from Stearns Wharf, for sure.
Yes, a significant portion is. I don't think it's
More
quite
than-
half and half.
It's about half and half?
I don't think it's quite that, but I'll definitely get back to you. I'll
that would
email
just be
that.
good information to know, because that's a significant revenue stream coming into the waterfront department. I think part of the thing that goes back and forth about what's appropriate is it's called a harbor commission, because that's what it says. That's what it says in our charter. So we call it a harbor commission, but it's the waterfront department, which a harbor is the heart of it, but not the entire entity of the department. And so I think sometimes that gets mixed in. So, for example, if it was just a harbor department, Stearns Wharf's not necessarily part of the harbor, it's part of the waterfront. And so looking at that, the full picture, I think, is what I try to do when I'm looking at your budget. And just to respond back to some of the comments here, and just also to clarify, there was an 11% slip fee increase number that was thrown out, but that's not what we're looking at this year. We're looking at a 3%? 4%? Okay, not 11, just to be clear. And also just to bring up one of the commenters about the salaries and benefit savings. As I understand it, the MOU that was passed that include Harbor and Patrol actually included a decrease, some savings from us as part of there were some salary and benefit issues that came up as part of the MOU that actually saved us some funding in the waterfront department. So I'll just throw that out there. You're not in charge of that part of the budget, but just to answer that, I think what I like to see, to me, the bathrooms and the fireworks, the bathrooms and go hand in hand with Stearns Wharf, and if the waterfront department is going to get the revenue from the property management and the leases from Stearns Wharf, then the expenses associated with people visiting the area and surrounding areas to get in that area I see the nexus there very clearly. So that to me is important. The fireworks to me also seems like a big waterfront event. So the lifeguards, I'll hear from my colleagues. I guess where I'm coming from is we have to find some revenue somewhere on the whole citywide budget issue. Parks and Rec is being hit very hard. It's unfortunate that it's being pitted as waterfront versus Parks and Rec when it's really not like that. We're looking at various issues throughout the city, but I think this is how you're trying to find that line item to make sense. The issue of you have a 1980 loan that has been paying $100,000 per year. There's still $1.1 million left in the principal. We're still talking another 11 years before that's paid in full. And the interest, you've got a good deal. You've had a good deal for a very long time, and I'm wondering if we really need to revisit that to be fair to the general fund and to everything else that we've done when we looked at loans, whether that's as an interest rate added on or accelerating the payment schedule. I mean, I think the Harbor Commission and the waterfront users might see that more clearly as a nexus, a right nexus versus a legal nexus, whatever we want to call it, in terms of lifeguard. So if we can, maybe we would look at that tomorrow and seeing how we can find something that's fair, that also results in the revenues that we need in terms of providing the crucial services also in the general fund arena. So that's. But I appreciate the comments, the many comments in the emails. I know for sure, I understand completely that people who have boats at the harbor are not all of them very wealthy, that either they're liveaboards or this is just something that is a core piece of who they are, and it's not because they're wealthy, it's because they happen to have a boat in the slip. And I truly understand that and understand that, that perception's not with me. So in terms of looking at the full range of the type of people who have slips in the harbor, I know that there's a wide diversity there. So I want to make sure people understand that. So I think that's where I'm headed. I think it's hard when you have different departments' budgets talked about on its own. And that's why I think tomorrow is going to be a very important discussion as we get into the final deliberations and looking at the entire city budget as a whole. So I'm trying to be as fair as I can with all the services and the sacrifices that we have to make throughout the city. So I hope that helps a little bit in terms of where I'm coming from. Thank you.
Mr. Williams?
Well, I just want to, first of all, say that I agree with Gary and the other folks who spoke about liveaboard permits, and I would commit to standing against any any large increases in liveaboard permits, because I do believe that there is a working class in the harbor, as well as folks who have more means, and we want to have a harbor that's accessible for all those folks, and so that everyone can continue to live and work there. And I love the idea about a non-state of California taxpayer surcharge. If it's legal, I think we should do it, because even people who are not in the harbor right now, even people who don't live in the city of Santa Barbara, pay taxes, state taxes that help through the Department of Boating and Waterways, help subsidize our operation there. So it's hard for me to imagine us excluding people who lived, a block out of or charging more for people who lived a block out of the city. But definitely non-state residents don't pay California taxes, and maybe there's a way to legally do that. So I'd love to look at that in the future. I agree that some of these things don't have a logical relationship with the harbor, but they do have a logical relationship with the parking lots. And I've always said that it would be totally fair to just give Parks and Rec both the revenue and expenses for all of the other parking lots besides the actual harbor main parking lot. But that would make your financial issues much worse. And I think that, though that would be very fair, look, for many, many years, the general taxpayers of this city have subsidized and paid for all of the expenses associated with those parking lots, and the waterfront has gotten the revenue from those parking lots. And that just, that's a subsidy, and that just can't continue forever. That being said, I don't want to make it onerous. I don't want to make it hard on people. I don't want to, make people lose their livelihood or their boats over it. And so I am willing to look at, everything we can, including maybe the idea of holding off for now on the lifeguards if we exchange it for a decent interest rate, or maybe more of a payment on the general fund loan. I think we could at least look at that tomorrow. I'm not saying that we can definitely do it, but I think we should look at it. And I hear people. But look, there's no way you can convince me that the waterfront fountain, the waterfront bathrooms, and the 4th of July don't bring people to the parking lots. They do. And if we didn't clean those bathrooms, believe me, less people would go to the parking lots. And if we didn't, take care of the beaches, less people would go to those parking lots, and the waterfront would have less revenue, which would mean higher slip fees. So, it's one thing that you realize from being up here, for 6 years is that fairness doesn't look quite as black and white after you're looking at, all of these exchanges of funds and all these relationships in the city. And we have to do something that's fair for all of the taxpayers of the city. And I hope to minimize the burden that would fall on waterfront slip holders.
Okay, Ms. Falcone.
Thank you. Let me ask, just to make sure I've got these numbers correctly. The slip fee that you're considering at 4% is to generate $140,000. Yes?
The slip fee proposed at 4% would be about 140. It's about 35,000 per 1%.
And we have 1,000 slips, 10% of which, or how many exactly? 1,100?
1,133 slips.
33, 10% of which can be used as liveaboard, but no more than 10%. Is that
That's correct.
Okay. A couple of years ago, 3 maybe, we agreed to increase, at your suggestion, increase the slip fees every year by a certain amount to get more into the market area, although I'm glad it was clarified that that's not apples to apples, it's apples to oranges because of all the incidental fees that are not marked into ours but are marked into a private marina. But that normal, and I think, Scott, you mentioned that what we agreed to was more along the 2% line every year for,
That's correct. In our 6-year cash flow program or projection, we use a 2% slip fee increase annually.
So this year it's doubling, or you're proposing to double what we had agreed to, which the slip holders have come to expect, that every year as opposed to every 6 years, they'll get an increase to keep up with the market, right?
Yeah, maybe I wasn't clear. It would be 2% each year, and next year we're proposing 4%.
Again, a doubling.
Correct. And then in our 6-year cash flow model, we projected the need to go to another 4% in 2011 and a 3% in 2012, go back to 2%. And I'd just like to clarify two things. One, if our revenues increase significantly, we will revisit the need to go to 4% in 2011. But right now, we can't answer that. And the second thing I would like to clarify is that's just a projection. We don't know that that's what we need. The primary reason to increase it 11% over that 3-year is really the program funding shift, because that's $250,000 annually that reoccurs every year. Capital improvements can be taken in and out. Over that same 6-year period, we projected to take out almost $600,000 of our planned capital improvements, simply so we could meet our budgetary reserve requirements. If we didn't have to meet those, or we could take more capital projects out, we could adjust that fee. And again, as Scott pointed out, a majority of our revenue increase is falling on the visitor side parking than it is on the harbor side.
It is, but if I heard you correctly, and that was going to be my next question, the proposed 4% this year, proposed 4% next year, and the proposed 3% in the following year in 2012 is primarily because of the program shift or because boats aren't selling and transferring?
Based on the modeling that we did, it's primarily on the reoccurring $250,000 increase.
Okay, so most of it, if not all of the $190,000 you're trying to
and again, along with
$150,000.
Carl's reduction of almost $500,000 or $600,000 of capital projects.
Right, okay. So out of the 4%, $140,000, so 2% of that would be $70,000, which comes pretty close to 65, if I'm doing my math correctly. Well, here are my comments. The waterfront, along with half a dozen other departments, are enterprise funds. And with all due respect to my colleague over there, I find the reasoning dubious. I understand it might be legal, but I find it squishy and dubious and convenient. So enterprise funds are supposed to be self-supporting, and they have balanced their budgets. And we just heard from the airport, and they've balanced their budget. The waterfront has three main sources of revenue, as John said. One is long-term leases, and the 10% that we get over the rent based on business, which you said is down. You can't just jump into a legally binding contract whenever you feel like it and you need money. So that's a foreclosed source of revenue adjustment, if you will. It's sort of stagnant. And the other one is the parking. And we are raising parking fees. I'm a little concerned that we don't get to that tipping point where people stop coming to the parking lots because it is too high. So there is a tipping point. I'm glad to see we're not there yet, or maybe this will put it there. But that is, to some extent, a foreclosed revenue source as well. You can only push that just so far. And we're pushing it quite a lot at this point. And then there are slip fees. Now, yes, if you try to do a comparison of apples to apples with these private harbors, it looks like we're very much below market. But it's not that way, as you explained. There are all kinds of incidental things that are factored in, and you have to really do that math, as Grant was trying to do, in order to get to an equal place, or at least a comparison place. Yeah, we're a little below, and that's why we agreed to raise it 2%, every year from now until a while. So that's kind of a convenient place, I guess. But where the logic of this with the lifeguards falls down for me is that lifeguarding is a recreational activity. It supports a recreational activity. Yeah, it happens at the water because that happens to be where the beach is, but it's a recreation. It supports a recreational activity, which is not a waterfront function at all, in any way. It's a recreation department function. So I can't get there from here. I can get to bathrooms. I can get to the fountain. I can barely get to fireworks because I think that is much more of a general activity, brings 100,000 people to town. And yes, so it does support the parking lots. That's why I can kind of stretch it and get there. I think that should stay in the general fund. But I cannot do lifeguards. And I would be happy to, not happy, but I have agreed in the past, I've been consistent over 8 years on this subject, that the slip fees should and could be increased to 2%, but not 4%. So if it's a matter of finding revenue to pay for lifeguards, I don't think lifeguarding is a place that the waterfront needs to be burdened with. And this is not, and I'm glad it was mentioned a number of times and recognized by people, this is not about rich yachts. This is not about big boats. This is, in fact, I'd be almost willing to look at charging the big boats, more than the little boats. But if you spend any time down there, these are regular folk, and some of them live aboard and really don't have the resources. The others that do have some resources are families, most of them working families. And so these are regular folk, a lot of whom live here, a lot of whom recreate and use other city services. So, I mean, some people have horses. Some people collect cars. Some people do a lot of different things. It doesn't mean they're rich. So I really think that this is a matter of equity, that this is a matter of who is being burdened with this particular raise in the revenues. And I just don't think it's fair. I don't think it's equitable to raise slip fees to pay for a recreational support activity. So there it is. And as far as the dredging is concerned, we are very lucky that we have the Coast Guard stationed in the harbor, because that gives the federal government really the one and only serious incentive to keep funding the dredge. They move the Blackfin, we've got a problem. And they could do it any day.
Mr. House.
We should throw a party for the Blackfin guys and really make them feel super welcome. Really, I have this little pin right here. But I think that's a very important point, and it's one that we need to be very careful about in the future. I'm sure we are. I need to get my mind around the scale of what we're talking about, so I can really understand what the true impacts are of some of these concerns that we have. First of all, at the beginning of the report, on page G359 at the very top, it says that the waterfront, and I'm quoting now, it says, provide the community with a quality waterfront for recreation and commercial use, along with mooring and landside services for boating activities. And that's the way the report frames the mission of the waterfront department. I don't know if that lifts from language that we have in our charter. I know that the Harbor Commission has a certain role that's defined specifically by the charter, but the waterfront department oversees a very broad purview, and the mooring, for instance, is outside of the harbor. That whole area is in waters that are off of our beaches there in East Beach and that area. So I don't have as hard of a time, I think, making the nexus for the waterfront. I would almost wish that at some point in the future we would change the name of our commission to Waterfront Commission and identify the broader scope of what is overseen, because the wharf, for instance, is a very good example, and the way the Harbor Patrol actually patrols for safety on the beaches, and there's an awful lot of a broader scope than I think is being represented here. But in any case, I really need to have some information to help me make our decision when we get there. The city is charging for the Parks and Recreation Department is being compensated for landscaping, and we've heard people say that if the Waterfront Department were able to just either contract that out or provide those services themselves, that they could do it for significantly less. I need to know how we assess our fees, and this goes beyond, I think, the Waterfront Department being able to answer this, but so that we're being competitive with the private market, or if that's something that we possibly can do, to really ensure that if we're going to be charging for those kinds of services, that they're comparable to what the private sector would be charging. Do we have any information about that, or are we really, by necessity, having to charge significantly more than the private sector would be able to charge for the same thing?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember House, we did an analysis several years ago about whether or not we thought we could do it less expensive than paying the Park and Recreation Department for that. We never took it to that next level and really did a cost comparison by either our staff or a combination of our staff and a tree trimming company doing it. Obviously, we don't want to be in the tree trimming business as a waterfront department. But the best way for me to give you an example would be if we were going to pay for the 3 restrooms and the dolphin fountain and pay the Park and Recreation Department to provide that service to the Waterfront Department, it was going to cost us about $148,000. When we said we didn't want to do that, we just wanted to pay for it ourselves and manage it and maintain it, the savings to the general fund was almost only $40,000. That's because we're paying the overhead costs for the Park and Recreation Department to supervise, manage, pay cost overhead, allocation costs that we already have in place. I have a supervisor, I have a superintendent, I have managers. Why pay them? And in effect, that's what we're doing for the landscape maintenance project. We're paying the fully burdened cost for the landscape maintenance costs. So that's the best way for me to explain it to you. I think we're confident that if we did it ourselves, we wouldn't have that duplication or duplicity of overhead.
Okay.
That would be the best way for me to explain it.
I think that's really a good explanation.
And if I could just comment on the waterfront versus the harbor.
Sure.
And the charter language, what I think was raised. And remember how old that charter language is. Before 1980, there only was a harbor department. There was no waterfront department. It wasn't until 1980 and the wharf reopened under the city's ownership and control did there become a waterfront department. And I wouldn't disagree with you. Harbor Commission is a misnomer, but quite frankly, that's what most commissions are that run harbors or have oversight. So there may need to be at least some clarity relative to that. And also related to the parking lots. Before 1980, the parking lots were not the waterfront departments. They were the city's general fund. They were just there. There was nobody charging for them. They were maintained by the city's general fund. It wasn't until 1980 they made a department and said, you're going to take on the wharf, you're going to take on the waterfront, you're going to take on the harbor. You need additional revenue. Go ahead. Take the parking lot, see if you can make money from them. So that perspective hopefully helps you that there's always been and I think we did this in a work session where we went through the disparity of kind of why Los Baños in the middle of the harbor that's run by the Park and Recreation Department, why the Cabrillo Arts Center, which is in the State Tidelands Trust, we get no revenue from it, is given to the Park and Recreation Department. That revenue doesn't come to us. So there are differences. I'm not complaining about them. I'm just trying to put it in the perspective of you trying to get your arms around it.
That's really helpful.
Clearly, we recreate at the harbor. Clearly, people recreate when they come to the waterfront department. So, I mean, to say we don't have a recreation component of what we do, we're a recreational harbor. Historically, we've never had any involvement in the beach portion of recreation or the lifeguards, which are under the auspices of junior lifeguard programs and come from the junior lifeguards, which I have a son that participates in, someday may be a beach lifeguard. It's been in the park recreation, but that's just because there's been no real clear decision on where it should be.
Got it. That's really helpful to have that kind of information. I have a couple other questions that are related. One of them, when I read the narrative here, and we've talked about this, 19% of the harbor is used by commercial fishermen and 81% by recreational and others. Others, I guess, about 10% or a little bit less are liveaboards right now. Is that accurate to say?
10% is accurate. I think we've currently filled all the liveaboard permits.
I missed it. The occupancy right now of the 1,133 slips is about?
Oh, it's 100% and people standing in line.
Okay, so let's just talk about these numbers for a second. We're talking about $140,000 from the slip fee adjustment of 4% in this first year. Am I accurate with that, what we're just talking about? And that's comprising 2% that was an anticipated increase and 2% additional that helps to meet this gap. It moves towards meeting this gap that we're talking about. So if you divide 140 by 1,100 or so, and you get about, 10. I'm just trying to figure out how much actual money it's going to be. It's about $120 a year, or so, $127 a year, I think, additional revenue per slip holder. And I know that it's distributed differently. That's just an average. But if you divide that by a dozen months, you're looking at about $10 a month increase, $5 of which, $5 increase per slip on average is the big issue that we're discussing today in terms of the additional amount of money that's being borne by this additional 2%. I want to get. I want to get.
Those are general. I mean, we could go back and look at specifics, and we could email you that. I know we ran some numbers as to what the average increase, and somebody asked about. We have a variation in rates. The 20% or the 20 to 35 slips are charged at one rate. The 35s to 40s are charged at another, and the bigger slips are a variated higher rate. So they'll all receive the 4%, but it'll be proportionate based on the rate that they pay. So it won't be the same for everybody. The smaller ones, it'll be a smaller increase, and those at the larger, it'll be a larger increase. But we could give you an average. Our average size slip is about 30. We have more smaller ones than we do have larger ones in our harbor.
Well, where I'm going with this as we try to wrestle this to the ground is, let's just say we exempted liveaboards from this whole extra 2% on top of the, increase. We would be losing about between $5,500 and $7,000 out of this entire amount. But they're the ones probably the most vulnerable in the entire harbor, people who are really sometimes on a shoestring. It's almost an affordable housing program that we have down there, and it's a legitimate way to live. But it is something that people really depend on, and they're not going to move into a high-cost condo in Santa Barbara anytime soon. Those are a minuscule amount of reduction in the actual additional revenue, but it could make a lot of difference to some of the people who would be most hard hit by a small increase. Not like this is a solution. We haven't made any decisions yet today, but I'm just trying to get some perspective on this thing. And I know there's a lot of energy behind it, but but there may be pressure points where we could make an improvement like that, or do something like what Mr. Williams is suggesting, some other change, and make a huge savings to the people who could be most hard hit by this, but still get the revenue that we need. I think that's about all I have, but I really appreciate your taking the time with that analysis.
Okay, and the one, Mr. Francisco, go ahead. Maybe you'll, I identified one thing nobody said, so let's see if you can guess what it is.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. No, whatever it is, I hope it's still there for you. Mr. Bradley, thank you for going through some of the details of the history of the Waterfront Department. I think that makes it clear because as I've looked into this, a lot of what is in the Waterfront Department or isn't in the Waterfront Department is the result of history. It's not always a clear-cut, particularly rational, logical process. And the other thing that I've seen, I mean, I've heard from a lot of people in the harbor as well, a lot of slip holders, and I'm absolutely sympathetic with everybody who doesn't want to see their fees go up, and if we can find a way to prevent that, I'd like to, including if the cost of maintaining the landscaping in the parking lots, if you can do that cheaper than contracting with Parks and Rec, if you can save money for the Waterfront Department, why not? That's how I view it. So if there's a cost savings there, I think that's something we should be looking at. On the other hand, you could say, for instance, well, what does lifeguarding have to do with a slip in the harbor? What does lifeguarding have to do with a restaurant in a harbor? What does a slip have to do with a restaurant? These are all very complicated relationships. People come to the waterfront for a lot of reasons, and a lot of those people end up going to the restaurants and shops. And the restaurants and shops are a significant portion of your income, and that supports the marina just like it supports everything else. So it's very hard to disentangle these things, and I believe that every activity that takes place at the waterfront, I mean, almost all of it is recreational, whether it's boating or swimming or whatever it is. And it's a place where people come to have a good time, basically, and they spend money doing that, and one way or the other, all of that money has to stay in the waterfront. It's unique in that respect. So I think we have to look at the Waterfront Department, as several people have already said. It is not just the harbor, though we have a harbor commission watching over it and doing a good job and paying a lot of attention to it, which I appreciate. So anyway, if we can find a way to reduce some of your expenses, I want to do that. But I think everyone has to keep in mind that there's a variety of income sources supporting a variety of activities down there. It's not just slips. It's not just slip holders. It's not just people who use the beach. It's all part of one big package that we can't really pull apart. Thanks.
That's a good point. And the other thing is that we talk about a balance and a tipping point about the parking fees and the parking stickers, the 1 year stickers. And I know that's a problem because if you start raising it too much, then fewer people buy them and so on. And in these tough times, fewer people buy them, as we've been seeing. But I think there's also a balance somehow between the leaseholders and the slip holders in some ways, because the leaseholders are pulling their own in a lot of ways, and we always hear from the slip holders. I totally understand why, but we also have some leaseholders in the back that didn't fill out the slips, and I think they're just as important in a lot of ways to the waterfront. So you start charging more for their parking, and they see fewer people in the restaurants. So it's a whole, the balancing down there is almost exaggerated, because we look at almost everything up here, it turns out to be a balancing act, but this is just really huge. It's almost like I could see John holding up everything and trying to balance it all. It's very, very difficult. And you're right about what goes in where. It's just, I hope it's not too arbitrary, but it is kind of, we just kind of put it there, you know. When we say you are providing quality waterfront for recreation and commercial use, that recreation, is that just boats or is it also lifeguards? So this is always a very difficult decision, but even more so because we have some affordable housing down there with the low income people who are on liveaboards. Not everybody's low income on liveaboards, but some are. So it's a very difficult thing, and I just hope we got enough out of all this to make some very smart decisions. It's going to be hard. So thank you, John, for all you do and everybody down there. We have the Finance Department, and it's going to, if we can take a quick, we'll just take a stretch while you get up here and work on it. If you can come back fairly quickly in 5 minutes.
Lovely serenade.
There's a 40-minute. We're going to call the Santa Barbara City Council meeting back to order. Thank you for that little break. Thank you. And our third department here. We didn't do this alphabetically, so I'm having trouble with my book. We have to go back to finance. Okay, Finance Department. And, well, Mr. Pearson, I guess I get to call on you first. Finance.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. Bob Pearson, Finance Director. And actually, as you know, today's meeting concludes the departmental presentations, and of course, Finance will be the last one, and Mr. Samario will give that presentation in a minute. We saved the best for last.
Of course.
But I did want to mention that we just handed out to you a packet which, well, here they come. Which is for tomorrow morning's meeting. As you know, there is a budget work session tomorrow morning.
Watch TV tonight. Darn it.
There's a budget work session tomorrow morning at 9:30 till 11. And the goal for tomorrow, or the plan, the agenda for tomorrow morning's meeting is to present to the council information and responses to questions that were raised during the departmental reviews. And so that's our goal tomorrow. We do not expect that council will begin any deliberations. Tomorrow we will be going over this packet in detail with you, so it isn't necessary that you spend hours studying it tonight. We will go through it with you tomorrow, but we do believe that this packet contains additional information or answers to questions from issues that came up during the departmental budget reviews. In addition, you will also note from the table of contents that's on the second page, but just below the cover memo, under Roman numeral 3, you will see that we've identified some funding options to avoid layoffs and restore services. So that's part of the packet. And then just to give you an idea of where we go from here, after tomorrow, then the next budget item will be on your agenda of June 9th. And that's when we would expect that council would begin your deliberations. We will also present to you at that time a small number, I think 3 or maybe 4 staff recommended adjustments, which are purely technical in nature, and that are going to the Finance Committee tomorrow. And so the 9th would be available for deliberations. If council concludes deliberations on the 9th, then we would be back to you 2 weeks later on the 23rd for adoption. However, if additional deliberation is needed after the 9th, we've reserved a week later, the 16th, for that. And if that happens, then we would be back to you 2 weeks after that on June 30th for adoption. So that's where we are now and where we would see it going over the next 3 weeks or so as we head to budget adoption, possibly on the 23rd, but certainly no later than Tuesday, June 30th, which is, of course, the last day of the fiscal year. Okay. So if there are any questions on schedule or logistics, I'd be glad to answer them.
Okay.
If
Any
not,
questions? I don't think so. Thank you.
if not, we'll turn it over to Mr. Samario for the Finance Department presentation.
Thank
you, Mr. Pearson. Madam Mayor, members of council, Bob Samario, Assistant Finance Director, and I am here to present to you the Finance Department's budget. And there are actually 2 pieces to the presentation. In the Finance Department, we actually have several funds, the general fund portion, as well as solid waste and risk management. And at the end, I'll also be going through the non-departmental budget, which is community promotions, essentially, and some other costs that we budget there. In terms of the outline, we'll start with sort of an overview of the department as a whole, so that spans all funds, and then we'll look at each individual fund, starting with the general fund, and then following that, the solid waste fund and self-insurance fund. In the general fund, the unique thing we'll be talking about, of course, is our proposed balancing strategy. We had a share, of course, of the $7.4 million in budget adjustments that were allocated to all departments, and we'll be talking about what our proposals are to meet our share of that. And then, of course, we'll talk a little bit about our P3s for next year. So first, just looking at our organizational chart, you can see that there are 6 operational areas: budget management, general services, treasury, accounting, and risk management. And we also have in the department, as of a couple years ago now, environmental services division, which has been put in the finance department at least temporarily, although it's been a couple years. I would suspect that at the end of next year we'll be making some decisions as to what we do with that division, whether it stays in the finance department or a part of it or all of it goes back to public works. But for now, it's still in the finance department. The department includes 18 programs, 3 funds, and over 51 full-time equivalent positions. In total for the finance department, you can see that our budget is $29.6 million. Always surprising me when I see that, but of course that number is heavily inflated by virtue of the solid waste fund, which includes a lot of those monies that are just passed through to the haulers. We have 2 refuse haulers, so we collect about $16 million on their behalf. The rest is for our own programs and services. The self-insurance fund represents 21% of that. Their budget is $6.1 million, and they have 4 programs. And the general fund piece, which is actually the smallest of the 3, actually has the most programs at 13. So looking at the general fund now, there are 4 divisions in the general fund. The administration division, that's essentially Bob Pearson, myself, an executive assistant, but we also have in that division our budget management folks. That's Michael Pease, our newly hired budget manager, along with Jonathan Abad, a finance analyst. We also have general services, which we all sort of recognize as purchasing, but it also includes central warehouse, mail courier services, and the meter reading folks. We have the accounting division, payroll accounting services, accounts payable, and utility billing. And then Treasury, the cash earning collection program, revenue cash management, and licenses and permits. Just to look real quickly at how those divisions break out by in total, you can see that they're relatively equal in size. The biggest is the accounting program at 32%, 11.2 FTEs. Next behind that is the Treasury division, and then followed by administration, and then general services. Looking at it by major object, you can see that there shouldn't be a surprise. You've probably seen this in most general fund departments. 71% of our total budget is for salaries and benefits, very labor-intensive department. The next largest cost is actually allocated costs. Those are the amounts we pay to internal service funds, whether it be information systems, whether it be building maintenance, telephone, those kinds of internal services. We get our share, and it represents 13% of our costs. Looking at a comparison of our general fund departments by major object, comparing the 09 adopted budget to the 2010, and that's actually mislabeled, 2009 projected, so 09 adopted, fiscal year 2009 projected, and then what we're recommending for next year. You can see at the bottom that we are proposing a reduction in the department of $414,000. It's about an 8.1% reduction in relation to the adopted budget, and of course that speaks to the overall reduction we had to come in to meet our share of the target adjustments or budget reductions. In total, our budget is going again down 8.1%. There's some ups and downs, but most of our share of the cuts were in the salary and benefits category as well as supplies and services. Allocated costs, you can see, are going down 6.2%. That's not really something that was part of our strategy, but as you may know, as part of the comprehensive strategy in the general fund, ICS funds excuse me, were also asked to come in with some cuts, and they were asked to reduce charges to general fund departments by about 7%, and so that's reflected in that dollar amount. In the special projects number, that primarily represents the monies we pay to the Santa Barbara Channels. It used to be called the Community Media Access Center. They have received a reduction in funding next year. And then just some other reductions of $12,000 in the other category. This is just a pictorial that shows the change from the adopted budget to the 2009 projected, 2010 recommended, and again an 8.1% reduction. These are the general fund revenues, and it's interesting because if you look at the 2010 recommended budget, our revenues total over $4 million. So that means that about 86% of our department's budget are recovered or is recovered from revenues. The largest piece, of course, is from the overhead. Those are the amounts we charge to enterprise funds for our services, and that amounts next year to almost $3.1 million. We also receive about $858,000 from our 2 refuse haulers. That's a 5% administration fee that is for services we provide to them, essentially for the billing of to all our customers for their trash services. And then you'll also see that there is a new revenue of fees and charges of $100,000, which I'll be talking about momentarily, but it is a new fee that we're proposing for next year. So our department's proposed balancing strategy, our total adjustment that we had to come in with was $467,838. You can see the largest majority of that is in the area of expenditures. We reduced our expenditures by almost $360,000. We did have some revenue increases of $109,000. So looking at those specific recommended adjustments, proposed expenditure reductions, I'll go through each one, and then I'll talk about in a moment the service impacts that we are anticipating. The first is to allocate an additional 12.5% of the Assistant Finance Director, and that's me, of my time to the Solid Waste Fund. This year, my time has been allocated about 37.5%, and we're proposing to increase that to a total of 50%. It seems odd, but that actually is representative of the amount of time that I've been spending on average over the last couple of years in the area of just managing solid waste. And a big part of that is because we have an environmental services manager position that's been vacant. We created that this past year, but we still have not filled that. And we didn't fill that, you may recall, because of the recyclables markets that just collapsed. And so we were concerned about our revenue outlook for the next couple of years, so we held off filling that position. But that's had a major impact on why I spent so much time. I'm hopeful that by next year we'll be looking to fill that position, and maybe by 2011 have my time reduced, so we're not allocating so much of my time to that. And most importantly, I'm not spending as much time in the solid waste area. The next two are the elimination of vacant positions. I wanted to stress they are vacant. One is in the accounting division. The other is in the treasury division. Those two combined are expected to save us about $156,000 next year. We also have 2 employees in our department who are full-time employees but have voluntarily decided to work reduced schedules, one at 90% and another at 3/4 time. One has actually been working part-time for a while, and we are just now adjusting our budget to reflect those hours that she's working. The other person actually started this year, recently, and voluntarily asked to reduce her hours to 90%. And so we've reflected those savings in our budget. And the total is $28,000 and some change. The next item is that we are proposing to eliminate contracted revenue audit services for sales tax, TOT, and utility users tax payments that we expect to have us save $78,900 next year, and we'll talk more about the impacts, or at least potential impacts of that proposal. The next item is eliminating funding for a cost allocation plan and fee study. We do that every 2 years, so we're proposing to bypass really one cycle and save us $40,000, and then we catch up in the 2 years after that. And then the last is just reducing various supplies and services line items by a total of almost $30,000. In terms of the proposed revenue enhancements, again, as I alluded to, a new revenue we're proposing, or new fee we're proposing for next year. It's a late penalty on delinquent utility accounts. We have currently each year about 24,000 delinquency notices that we process, folks that just don't pay on time. And we currently don't charge any kind of fee or penalty. Most communities do, and we are proposing that next year we establish a fee to provide some kind of deterrent for that, because it does involve time on our parts to process those 2,000 or so per month. We looked at different approaches using a percentage-based fee versus a flat fee or a hybrid, and in the end we ended up with a fixed $5 per delinquent account fee. We thought it made more sense than a percentage, because the cost to process those delinquencies doesn't depend upon the size of the bill. It's just a fixed amount or fixed cost to process those. So we decided that the fee should be also fixed. We conservatively have estimated that the revenues from that $5 would be about $100,000. It will likely be a little bit more, but for now we're just estimating $100,000. And then the second item is just to increase our miscellaneous revenues for various license and permits that we have, and that $9,000 actually reflects what we're actually bringing in this year. So it's just an adjustment to the budget to reflect the actual revenues that we're bringing in. So in terms of the impacts to our services, so starting with the elimination of positions, we had a position that we created about 2 years ago, the senior accountant position, and it was the result of 2 developments. The first was the fact that about 3 years ago, GASB, or the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, issued a new pronouncement, Statement 34, that dramatically increased what we were required to do by way of accounting for our fixed assets or capital assets. And I won't get into the details of that, but the impacts have been substantial. We now have to do a lot more than we've done in the past. And so that was one development. The other development was the fact that, and this is really more of an ongoing thing or just a slowly developing issue, is that our workload is just generally increasing. The departments ask for and demand for more services from our department and from our accounting staff. And it's getting harder and harder to respond to those increases for services. We currently have essentially 1.25 staff, professional staff in the accounting division that account for the city of our size and complexity of our size. It's a $250 million budget, and yet we only have 1.25. And I'll bet if you look at other communities of our size and scope and complexity, you'll see that at least double that amount of accounting and professional staff. So it's amazing, and I'm always amazed at how much we can get done with the few staff that we have. So there's not going to be any new impact starting July 1 as a result of not having this position, but it's just an impact we've seen over time, and again, more recently with GASB Statement Number 34. The administrative specialist position, this is a position in the Treasury Division. It essentially helps with the cashiering, but also helps out with the license and permits program. The impact of eliminating this position, which has been vacant essentially for a year, we've had a part-time hourly employee working for 6 months, but since January, that position has been vacant. The impact is going to be on our audit program for business licenses. We have a multi-pronged approach, We do field inspections, or at least in the past have done field inspections. We do some data matching with data that we get from the State Board of Equalization and the Franchise Tax Board to compare that to our business license data to identify businesses that are in the city that potentially aren't paying their business license. It's been a real successful program. And we also just review periodicals for any new businesses that may come up. As a result of the not having this position, we are going to have to scale back, in fact, eliminate the field inspection program. We're going to really focus on the data matching part because that's really, we get the most bang for our buck, but we're limited in how much time we can spend on that. And then the review of periodicals will occur less frequently. And then the last is elimination of contracted revenue audit programs for, again, utility users tax, sales tax, and TOT. And as you can imagine, we in the department we're a little bit leery about eliminating these contracts because it's, we potentially could be losing revenue that we would otherwise, or these contractors would find on our behalf. But in the end, we felt that if it came down to eliminating more staff, filled positions, and eliminating these contracts, we thought that this would be the better approach, mostly because we see this as a one-year solution. We don't expect this to be an ongoing sort of measure. We're going to reevaluate starting next year. We're going to go 1 year without this program. A lot of these audits that we do, when we find things, they're retroactive, or when we do audits of like hotels, we look 3 years back. So we're really not going to be in that much of we're not creating that much of a gap. So it's just a 1 year measure. And we also just look at our revenues anyway. We look for trends and any unusual variances, particularly with our hotel revenues that come in monthly. If we see anything unusual, we'll get on it. And if we have to spend some unbudgeted money to do an audit, we'll do so.
Madam Mayor?
Sure, go ahead, Mr. Horton.
That's a risky move. And my experience, which is almost 40 years now in this stuff, is once you eliminate it, it's gone. And there's going to be a different group of people up here next year, and I don't know whether anybody's going to remember it or not. So unless the minutes of this meeting reflect that we need to take a look at it, I'm afraid this is something that will get out of control in the future, and then we'll say, well, what happened? And it'll be because of this. So I just got to register a complaint about that one.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, members of council, I just wanted to say that we won't forget this. This is important to us, so we don't need reminders on this one.
Okay.
So as every department had to do, we came up with our contingency list for an additional $1.9 million, at least our share of the $1.9 million, which is $120,000. And as I kind of mentioned just a moment ago, we really don't have any more options if we had to cut more. In order to meet our $120,000, we would have to be looking at eliminating 2 filled positions, one in purchasing, an administrative specialist, and another administrative specialist in the utility billing program. I would say that both of those, if they were gone, would have an impact on our services. As you can imagine, utility billing staff, there are 4 people there. They're primarily just addressing questions from our customers, ratepayers, and I think that would have an impact on those services. So the cost of those positions is about $129,000, and so since we only needed $120,000, I would propose that we would add back some money for our TOT audits, $10,000, to come up to that balance of $120,000. Some key performance measures. You may recall that we recently implemented a new utility billing system. It was it's been working great. We actually purchased along with that what's called eCare. It's an online utility payment system. We kind of delayed implementation because we wanted to focus on the core system, and so our plan is for next year to implement that module. We think that'll be well received and be used quite a bit. As we do every year, we're also planning on publishing our CAFR, our Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, by November 30th, 2009. We're also going to be working with IS, Information Systems, to convert reports that we're getting on what are called green bar, just big reports, a lot of paper, to an electronic file format. And we also are looking at next year rebidding 90% of our blanket purchase orders over $40,000 upon expiration of those existing contracts. And just by way of background, we have blanket purchase orders that really provide for an entire years of services. And we don't always rebid those when they're lower dollar amounts. So we may every year just reissue a blanket purchase order to the same contractor. And our goal has been, and we've done this with the higher dollar thresholds, looked at these and looked to rebid them, because oftentimes, even though they've been providing good services, we can save money by just rebidding, whether we end up with the same contract or a different one. And so our goal is to look at those that are over $40,000, and we're just working our way down to even those that are $25,000 in a couple of years. We'll look at those as well. And then, as you know, we have a lot of people who have opted out to receiving a printed pay advice. We currently have 500 who have opted for that, and our goal is to increase that by 50 by next year, end of next year. So, any questions on the general fund, or okay to move on to solid waste?
Okay, Mr. House.
Yes, Mr. Samario. In the general fund services that are being provided there, those include the ones that, like somebody comes here to pay their water bill, for instance, right? The cashier downstairs.
That's correct.
That's a very important and sensitive point of contact with the public in the city of Santa Barbara. To what degree would you say that these reductions would affect the quality of our customer relations, the service orientation with regards to the public, if at all?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember House, I don't think it's going to impact that part. What we're going to do is we're going to make sure that part is properly staffed, and as indicated, what's going to be impacted is sort of behind the scenes, the amount of effort we can then spend on such things as a business license audit program, because we're having to backfill for a vacant position or an eliminated cashier position. So it's just, the priority, of course, is to the customers at the counter, and what suffers then are the things that are more back office.
Okay, good. Because our staff is known for being really courteous and really helpful and extending themselves. And I guess my concern is that as we cut back, that can put stress on a staff and cause it to be sort of an edgy, difficult environment to be in. And I'm worried that might get conveyed onto our customers, our constituents.
Right. And I will say, though, with the contingency items, which we're hoping to not get into, if we had to eliminate a staff in the utility billing operation, I think that would have an impact, because they're answering phones from customers and will be less able to do that.
Okay, good. But your recommended cuts would not really affect that, and you're really going to, I hope you keep a really high emphasis on that, because we really need to keep hearing positive things.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's move on to solid waste. First of all, I just wanted to show kind of this pie chart. You can see that for next year, the budget is almost over $18.7 million. 84% of those appropriations, or the monies that are spent, go to the haulers. You can see that we have a portion that does fund our salaries and benefits, representing 6% of the overall budget. Supplies and services 2%, et cetera, et cetera. So again, 84% is just paid to the haulers as a pass-through. There are 9.9 FTEs in the solid waste fund. This looks at a comparison between the current year adopted budget and the recommended budget for next year. You can see some of the adjustments or changes for next year. The 12.9% reflects the allocation of my time, additional allocation of my time, as well as just general increases in salaries and benefits. You can see that the hauler services, basically the payments to our two contractors are going up about $600,000. If you look at what's going to be expected to pay, we're going to pay this year, but at the end of this year, our projections, if you will, for this year, it actually closely resembles what we're recommending next year. We're not really proposing any major increases in our payments to them, as well as the revenues from our ratepayers, as we'll talk about in just a little bit. So you can see in total, we're going to see a 6.5% increase to our budget and about a $1.2 million increase overall.
And what sticks out there is the supplies and services for 300% more.
Yes, and that's good point. And that's really just a reflection of some shifts between where we previously categorized things in special projects that we've shifted up to the supplies and services where they more appropriately belong.
Okay.
What I did want to show you is the special projects detail, because as you see here, it's a pretty big number, $1 million, 29,000. I wanted to show you the details. First, we do pay almost $450,000 to the county. They administer regional programs. The biggest, of course, is the Hazardous Materials Collection Center at UCSB, and so they basically administer it on the behalf of all communities in this area, all jurisdictions. Our share of those costs are about $450,000, as I indicated. The tipping fee reimbursements. Spend a little bit of time on that. It's actually been revised down to $288,000, but this is something that the county is proposing. They're going to be adding a surcharge to the land to Higuas, $4 per ton. It was previously going to be $6 per ton, and the reason they're doing that is because as they're experiencing today and will be experiencing soon, is that they're being impacted by the recyclables markets. You know, there's been a substantial decline, almost a complete turnaround. And from a great market to nothing. And so they're feeling today the impacts of those lost revenues, and they will continue to feel those next year. And what they're proposing to do as a way to offset that is to raise the tipping fees to all jurisdictions, all users of the Higuas landfill. Our share of that, our impact to us, will be about $350,000, now $288,000. We have decided that normally we would flow these right through the ratepayers. We would just pass it on, and so they would fund it, and it would be in the rates, and they would be fine. But we decided to avoid having to pass it on to our ratepayers because we don't need to do that right now. Our recycling revenues, because we're paid 2 years in arrears, are doing okay. We're expecting $1 million next year, or a little bit less than that, but we're expecting a pretty substantial amount of revenues. So we didn't need to pass it on directly to the ratepayers this year. Later on, we might need to raise rates or pass it on, but for now, we didn't need to. It's a 1-year surcharge. So we just decided that we would just reimburse the haulers directly from those recycling revenues rather than build it into the rates. I know that's kind of a complicated explanation. Be happy to answer your questions, but essentially we are now budgeting a reimbursement to the haulers for what they're going to pay in additional landfill disposal costs that normally would be funded from the rates. Any questions on that one? I know it was a tough one. Okay, the next item is the food scraps program.
Oh, Ms. Falcone.
I don't have a question about this. I have a question about the handout. There are some of these slides that are blank, and some of them, like that one, doesn't appear. Is it just possible to get reprinted ones after? So
absolutely.
I can put them in the book. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. House has a question.
Yes, Mr. Samario. I think I have the answer to this, but I want to check. So by doing that, by holding off on passing that additional cost through this year and all, you're able to keep with what you're telling the, let's say the commercial, that whole new rate structure that we have for commercial recycling and commercial trash and all that. You're able to hold on to what you've been presenting to the business community and not make any changes and give them a sense of certainty, at least for this next year or so, that we're going to do what we said.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember House, that's correct. And again, we're trying to provide rate stability. So since we have the revenues to cover this cost, why impact the ratepayers unnecessarily, particularly given that we're going to be making these adjustments to the business sector, new rates. We didn't need to pass this cost on today. And we have the revenues to cover it ourselves. Later on, we're going to be evaluating rates and that we charge. But since it's just a one-time surcharge, we thought that why not take the recycling revenues that are going to be substantially higher next year than this year, just use those funds to cover that, and then we'll evaluate next year to see what we may need to do.
The value you're expressing is rate stability.
That's correct.
For the consumer, for the end user.
Right.
Thank you.
The next item is for the food scraps program. As you know, we are planning to implement a new program for food scraps recovery and composting. We are going to be paying for those services to Engel and Gray instead of to Higuas landfill. So we are budgeting next year $115,000 for those services. We have some money next year budgeted for a rate study. We're not sure we'll get to it, but we're hoping we will. It's the same thing we did for the business sector. We just want to do the same for the single-family residential sector. We have a Recycle at Work program that basically funds bins and containers for businesses so they can start kind of moving in the direction of recycling. That's really our foot in the door, if you will, and we do provide them free containers. We are budgeting next year for additional costs for the CT study. You know, we're going to have some costs this year. We're going to have some more costs next year. We budgeted some amount. School recycling.
CT means
conversion technology.
Technology.
Sorry, conversion technology. We do spend some money for the schools, helping them to get on a recycling program, but also providing them some bins and containers. And then some miscellaneous costs for Looking Good Santa Barbara and other. Our revenues really mirror the expenditure side. Solid waste fees, 84%. Again, it's just what we're passing to the haulers. We do retain some of those rates or revenues from the rates. We have a 3% regional program fee that we pay to the county. That funds at $458,000. The city retains a portion, 4%, because that's what funds our staff, our programs. We do have recycling revenues that we're budgeting 5%. And then franchise fees that are on top of that, an additional 1% and just another. And this is the details of those revenues. You can see that includes the solid waste fees, regional programs fees, as I just mentioned. I did want to, again, highlight the recycling revenues. You'll see that next year we initially budgeted $1 million in recycling revenues compared to $450 this year. So, as again, the trend for us has been up because we're 2 years in arrears. We're feeling the benefits, if you will, from the last 2 years ago on how the recycling market just took off. So next year we're expected to receive $1 million. Actually, it's been revised. I was just informed last week or 2 weeks ago from the county that the final numbers are $871,649, but still substantially higher than this year. Now, I'm going to try to describe to you what I kind of talked about with respect to the recycling revenues and the tipping fees and the like. This is what we're going to get this year, and we're proposing to get next year in recycling revenues, but what we expect to happen 2 years out. Even though we budgeted $450 this year, we actually expect to receive $525,000 as our share from the processing of mixed recyclables from carts and cans. Next year, we expect to get $871,000, but because the market just collapsed, based on some estimates from the county, that could go down all the way to $120,000, a negative $120,000. We actually pay to process these things in 2011. 2012 is just a guess. Who knows what's going to happen? This is just based on current trends. And you can see at the bottom that these revenues are this year based on 2007 results. For next year, 2008 results. So again, 2 years in arrears. Now, this is what's going on at the county. They are currently, this year, they're going to be seeing a decline in revenues, or expecting a decline of $81,000 because they're seeing these in real time. And next year, they're expecting a decline of $270, and then after that, $250, then who knows beyond that. And so you can see we're running in polar, kind of different directions because for some, again, I'm not sure why we did, but we eventually agreed to a 2-year arrear kind of arrangement rather than being paid in real time. So we're enjoying the benefits now, whereas the county is seeing those hits today.
Okay, Mr. House and then Ms. Falcone.
Just briefly, Mr. Samario, just help us understand it just a little bit, and if maybe when we get to it, if not right now, at least in our discussion, talk to us about maybe there's some other market for the recyclables, like we convert it to energy or who knows what. But, I mean, is this that just the market doesn't pay as much for recyclable things anymore?
Yeah, I think the biggest impact is, of course, the general economic conditions that we're experiencing now have had a major impact on everything, including the recyclables market. Our the biggest demand comes from China for our materials, primarily paper products. They have essentially stopped taking our material, and so there is no longer a market. A lot of people are stockpiling the stuff. Some, unfortunately, are landfilling it. We have not done that, but the markets have just dried up. We think that things will turn around eventually, so we don't want to start landfilling this stuff. We're just doing what we can. If we have to pay essentially to process our recyclables, and as you can see that we may end up having to do that, we think it's still the right decision. But I think it'll eventually turn around. As the economy turns around in countries like China and others, their demand starts increasing or turning around, I think we're going to see a return, maybe not to the same level or not as quickly, but I can't imagine that we're going to see these negative numbers for more than a couple of years.
Well, thank you, and I hope that when we get to it, you can help us to see if there are other markets or other ways to really utilize that, or am I just barking up the wrong tree with that?
No, I think long term, I'm not sure. I know the answer to that. I think they're always looking for those things. These people are in the private sector. They're always looking for ways to make money, so I know they're trying to be creative as possible, looking for their options, but right now there aren't many.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Falcone.
We have this 2-year lag, and that's an agreement with the county.
Right.
Because although all our combined recyclables go down to Gold Coast and they go ahead and process it, and then they give us back a bulk sum, which we then divvy up between the 3 jurisdictions, Goleta, Santa Barbara, and the county. The fact that the county is negative this year, do they not have, they keep their money in real time? Is that the deal? Okay.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Falcone, that's correct. For the first 3-4 months, they were seeing these huge numbers, and then the last 5 months have just been, down in the cellar. And so now they're projecting that their share, if you will, of what they're going to realize this year is actually a loss of $81,000.
But they're operating in real time because
They are.
Gold Coast gives them the check, and we are not operating in real time.
Correct.
Because we have a contract with the county as to when we get reimbursed.
So they're having to dip into the reserves to fund what they owe us. in a sense.
It's a little deceiving to compare those two things because, again, it's apples and oranges, and one is time and one is not real time. So thanks.
Well, but really, it gives us a couple of years to plan when we see a couple of years out there. So it's been very hard for the county and hard for us in a couple of years, for sure.
It's kind of like calculating the PERS rates, 2
Right,
years out. It's
yeah.
exactly the same kind of, dilemma.
So again, I just wanted to remind you that what their county response, because they're seeing these losses now, is that they are proposing a one-time surcharge, and I put a question mark behind one time because who knows what's going to happen. We may need to do for 2 years. They originally proposed a $6 per ton surcharge that's paid by those who are disposing materials at the landfill, and it'll generate in total for the whole, if you will, the whole Tahigo waste shed about $700,000 in additional revenues from the franchise and non-franchise haulers. Our share of that will be about $288,000, as I indicated. What's important to note is that even though we are proposing to reimburse the haulers for those $280,000 in costs they're going to incur from our own revenues, that the county is really retaining those funds from the city of Goleta and from the city of Santa Barbara, and are retaining those so that we can later take credit for those 2 years now down the road when we need those. So we're not losing those revenues. We're just sort of floating the ratepayers, if you will, so they're not having to be impacted next year. 2 years down the road when we may see these real losses, the county will have those funds on our behalf and will apply them to the whatever they may owe us or whatever we may owe them. So it's just really a float, if you will. So our response is that we think that because we're not seeing any impacts, no need to pass those costs on the ratepayers. So we're just going to directly reimburse those haulers for the $280,000. We budgeted accordingly. And again, it'll be funded from recycling revenues. In 2011, as kind of we're looking at projections, longer-term projections, we may need a rate increase of 2% to cover those continued losses from recycling revenues. I'm hopeful that it won't happen. I'm hoping that things turn around sooner. But it will be a 2% increase on top of any of the rate increases that are directed by our franchise agreement, as we'll talk about in a moment. And as indicated, the county will reimburse us for those monies collected on our behalf. So some highlights, preparing conversion technology request for proposal. We'll actually be talking about this a little bit tomorrow when we bring in an item to council. But just real quickly, we are in the process of finalizing a request for proposal, which we hope to issue this summer, whether it be August or September, to 8 vendors who are potentially going to be siting a facility at the Tahigo landfill to process our basically our mixed solid waste into an energy source. We are also working on developing a joint powers agreement, a JPA, not an authority, but an agreement between all the jurisdictions that will be part of this project that will define everybody's roles and responsibilities with this project. We've done, right now we're working on a site analysis being done by the county. We're working with a CT subgroup, our own solid waste committee, and just officials from all those who are be participating, and we've been working with them closely and giving them periodic reports. But again, the next major milestone is an issuance of an RFP in August or September. Another item is we have, as you may know, we have at the Elings Park site, we have an old, I guess it's a landfill, maybe it's more appropriately described as a dump. It's been closed for many years. I think in the 60s it was closed down. We have, because we're required by law, we have what are called wells that monitor any emissions of methane or any other sort of bad emissions, bad gases. There are 15 wells in the site, and we have been recently, for the last several years, been seeing readings of what's been higher than tolerable at 3 of those sites. It's primarily methane gas that we are now required by state law, and we're being pushed by the local enforcement agency, which is at the county, who represents the state, to do something about that. So we have just completed a design study to try to mitigate that. It's going to essentially be the installation of pipes underground that will capture that methane gas and then treat it, either burn it, scrub it, or have one of those perpetual flames. We're not sure just yet. We've been working with the Ewing Spark folks to make sure that the construction of the installation of these pipes is done at a time when the fields are being least used, and that it's going to be the least disruptive to the whole operation. So we have completed that, and we've got a design that looks pretty good. It's going to be just minimally disruptive in terms of what the areas that are impacted, and that we think we can get it done in December, January, as long as the LEA is a little more patient than they have been. So this is an important project.
I would hope that we would go for some kind of a grant or something like that so we can capture that methane instead of put a flame out there. I know this is a small amount, and that may be the problem, but it just makes me kind of uneasy to put that methane into the air.
That's a valid question, I think, Madam Mayor. It's the methane gas that's going to be captured. It's pretty minimal. I think once we start trying to convert it to something else, then we get into other sort of permitting issues, and
I know.
So we'll be looking at that for sure. And we are looking at a potential grant that could help, that will match our costs. So it could be just paying half of this. It's because of the state problems.
Isn't this like fuel cell kind of material, like we've done at Elistero?
No.
Smaller amount. We needed more trash in that dump. Oh, well. Something like that.
And then we're also working on a project to reduce the use of single-use bags. It's no longer plastic bags, but it's paper and plastic. And we've been working with Santa Barbara Channel Keeper and Kathy King, who you know, who's really was behind a lot of this, a big spokesperson for the elimination of single-use bags and styrofoam, for that matter. We've been doing a lot of outreach lately with business groups and leaders, including the California Grocers Association. We are working currently on a voluntary program, but ultimately we're going to be looking at some mandatory program via an ordinance. We've had some really good cooperation and support from Matthew Dotson from the California Grocers Association. He's really supportive, and he represents a lot of the large chains here. So we think with a voluntary program we can make some good strides, but ultimately we think some kind of an ordinance it will be appropriate. So our rate increases for next year, as you may know, that our rates are really controlled by the franchise agreements. We don't have a lot of discretion. The franchise agreement requires or indicates that we could raise rates only by the CPI for the collection portion, which represents about 65% of the total costs. And as I kind of mentioned before, any increases in tipping fees that are charged by the county, we have to directly reimburse the haulers for that. So for the collection portion, the CPI for December through January 2009, which is the basis for the increase next year, was actually a reduction. It went down by just under 1%, 0.646%. So for that portion, the rates will go down by about 4.42%, which is 65% of the CPI. The tipping fee, as indicated, is going to go up $4. Now, this is not the surcharge. They've already proposed a $4 increase apart from the surcharge of $4 effective July 1, and that's an additional $288,000. That portion is reflected in the rates. We built that into the rates, and we'll be recovering it that way. And that portion represents about 1.6%. So the net rate increase for next year for both pieces, the collection piece and the disposal piece, amounts to a net increase of about 1.2%. So not a big increase. Now, as you know, we've been working and completed a rate study for just the business sector, not the single-family residential sector or multi-unit. We just completed that, and we were working on a whole new rate structure for the business sector to provide more incentives for diversion, because they're really diverting. When you look at it, it's really about 14%, which is pretty low as compared to the single-family residential sector, which are more above 50, almost 60%. And we also want to establish new rates for the food scraps recovery and composting program, and then lastly to resolve anomalies that are in our current rate structures that provide some disincentives. So just some key features of the new rates. It's important to recognize that they're designed to be revenue neutral. We're not trying to raise more revenues necessarily. We're just trying to provide more incentives for people to recycle, so more penalties for those who don't and more benefits for those or rewards for those who do. We've also included in the rates that we're proposing, and again, I want to mention that these are anticipated. They're not scheduled for July 1. These are things that we're proposing for this fall, whether it be September or October. We're in the middle of an outreach, as you know. But essentially, they are designed to, they will include a $350,000 cushion, because if we miss our projections, we're going to either be under or over our revenues, and we don't want to be under and not have money to fund or pay the haulers their share of the revenues. They also include additional collection costs and also savings in disposal. There are going to be some additional costs because there's more routes, a new program, but we're also going to see savings in the disposal. Next year, the rates for disposal will be $69 per ton. Sending it to Engle and Gray up north is going to be $50 a ton, so we'll experience some savings there. Any questions on that? Well, we'll be coming back to you, of course, more in the next month or so, giving the results of our outreach efforts and talking to the businesses.
Yeah, no questions. Thank you.
Okay, so some key performance objectives. As we do every year, we want to meet with new businesses and new contacts to talk to them about the benefits of recycling and, of course, the financial benefits of recycling, not just for environmental reasons. We also want to enlist 71 food-serving establishments in the Food Scraps Recovery Program. We have at least that many that are lined up right now wanting to participate, so we don't see that as being a problem. It's really going to be a workload issue for us. And then implement a final strategy, whether it be a combination of a voluntary program and a mandatory program to reduce the consumption of single-use bags in the city. Self-insurance fund. Go through this quickly. Their overall budget next year is about $6.1 million. You can see that 78% of their budget is for claims and insurance. The biggest portion of that is in workers' comp claims and insurance. Behind that, liability claims and insurance, and then property and miscellaneous insurance costs. Only 10% of their budget is for salaries and benefits, and they also have supplies and services and their share of allocated costs. You can see the details by major object and the change from the 2009 amended budget to next year's recommended budget. We're actually going to see a reduction of 33%. Now, if you look down under the amended column, the transfers outline almost $6 million. You might recall that this year, in order to help balance the general fund, as we saw revenues deteriorate, we actually transferred money from the workers' comp reserves into the general fund, and that was funded from their own reserves, which they had above actuarially required amounts. And so you'll see that next year we're not recommending any transfers out. We're not proposing any use of workers' comp reserves next year to help balance our budget. It's still an option for us. There are some additional funds that are available, but we are not proposing that currently. And that's really the reason for the decline. Their revenues next year are really, it's almost a silly slide to show, but they're really just based on what the program costs are going to be, and they adjust the charges to the various departments and funds accordingly, so they're just balancing out those costs. Some key performance objectives for next year. They plan on conducting a semi-annual open claim review on all open claims for 4 departments that are with the highest frequency of claims, and this is for the workers' comp program. It just means meeting with those departments, as typically police, fire, public works, and one other department, sitting down with them, going over their claims, the cost of those claims, and just to kind of just to refresh their memories, and so that they're not sort of out of sight, out of mind, that we do have people that are employed with the city that are just out of work because of injury. And what those impacts are. They also want to conduct 4 fleet safety classes by June 30, 2010, which they do each year. And then they also want to reduce occupational injuries by 5%. Now, they're not in complete control of that, but they do have a number of programs, educational programs, and workplace safety programs that have worked and have been successful the last several years. Okay, moving on to the non-departmental budget overview. First, it does include sort of 2 programs. One is just what we kind of associate with non-departmental, the community promotions piece, and then we have some other parts of that department that really relate to debt service, capital, appropriated reserves, and some other costs. And I'll just go through those quickly. First, the community promotions piece. You can see the list of those organizations that receive direct funding. They are what we call, or have what we call, line item status. The biggest, of course, is the Santa Barbara Conference and Visitors Bureau and Film Commission. This current year, we're funding them $1.5 million. Now, you can see to the right that we have basically a decrease in virtually all these organizations. As you may remember, we have proposed that these outside organizations see a cut in their funding corresponding, or at least commensurate with what we have in the general fund departments, what we've asked them to cut as well. And at that time, it was an 8.4% number, so you can see that each one of those is going to be realizing at least a proposed reduction in their funding of 8.4%. Now, if you look down below toward the bottom, you'll see 4th of July fireworks. You just heard that discussion. The $55,000 currently budgeted in the general fund for that event has been shifted to the waterfront for next year. And then down below, the last item, Earth Day Festival, budgeted to this year $2,500. What we found was that it was actually a duplicate. It's already been budgeted in the city administrator's office, so we didn't need to, once again, duplicate it next year. It was just a mistake. But again, everybody's going to be seeing an 8.4% reduction for next year. Some of the other things that are in the non-departmental department, we have a downtown visitor restroom program. It's been around for many years. No change in funding that's proposed. It's really just reimbursing certain businesses for offering to basically the visitors along State Street access to restrooms. We also have funding to New Beginnings. They are the ones that manage the overnight RV parking program. We fund them at $43,500 this year, and we're proposing that be cut by 8.4%, which is $3,654. Our debt service is just driven by our debt service schedule, our amortization schedule, the bonds repayment schedule. Our capital outlay fund, you'll see a reduction of $600,000 in relation to the current yearly adopted budget. We actually had anticipated about a $1.8 million capital program for 2010, so it's really a reduction of $800,000, if not more, in what we had anticipated based on our needs. The appropriated reserves, this year we had set up about $790,000 as a contingency in case we saw a deterioration of revenues. Again, this was established back in April of 2009, or 2008, excuse me, before we saw the bottom fall out. Obviously not nearly enough of what we needed. Next year, we're proposing an appropriated reserve of $339,000. There's nothing magical about the number. It's just how the numbers shook out when we finally did the balancing of the general fund. We ended up with a small surplus, and we decided to put that into appropriated reserves.
Okay, Ms. Schneider.
The New Beginnings contract, we heard this presentation under the Public Works Department budget in the either downtown, it's a pass-through through general fund. I just answered my own question. Never mind.
That's the best kind of question.
So with that concludes my presentation.
Okay.
Thank you for your patience.
Okay. No, thank you very much. It's good. The non-department department is kind of interesting. I don't know who the head of that is, but it's okay. Mr. Francisco, we have some people that would like to speak, but go ahead.
Okay. Could you go over the concept, the $288,000 that we're going to absorb for the haulers, and that's really not going to cost us anything? Could you go over that one more time?
Sure. So, as I indicated, because the county is realizing those losses today, they need to find a way to make up for those lost revenues. And so they're proposing a surcharge, now $4, was $6, but now $4, that will help them balance their budget for next year to offset those lost recycling revenues, their share at least. Unfortunately, though, because it's a surcharge, or at least it's an increase in the landfill, the tipping fee, every jurisdiction that sends their trash there is going to be, every hauler that represents those jurisdictions is going to be having to pay those costs as well. So the city of Santa Barbara, our haulers, Marburg and Allied Waste, when they go take our trash, they're going to be having to pay that additional $4.
Right.
We don't have that problem right now. We don't have a revenue problem or a balance or budget problem because we're enjoying the 2 years worth, recycling revenues, not the real-time revenues. So we're actually seeing an increase in our revenues starting next year, beginning next year. So we don't need to, in a sense, penalize our ratepayers for this surcharge when we don't really need it. We can use our own recycling revenues, the increase of those revenues, to fund that cost that are being borne by the haulers and just reimburse them. 2 years from now, when we start realizing those lost revenues, then we'll have to look at our options for how do we manage that. Do we use some of our reserves? Do we adjust rates? But one thing we'll be able to do is the amount of money that the county collects from our haulers, the $280,000 next year, they're going to actually keep that in the bank for us. So even though we pay to the haulers, they're going to collect it. The haulers are going to pay it to them, right? We reimburse the haulers, but they'll retain those funds so that 2 years from now, when we need them, they will reimburse it. I guess we can ask them to pay it to us now, but just for
So they've made that agreement.
They have made that agreement. So 2 years from now, and same thing with Goleta, they're going to, of course, collect monies from their haulers, and they're going to retain those funds. And then when Goleta needs it, because they're the same arrangement that we do, 2 years from now, then they'll be will be used to credit their costs or their payments to the county.
Thank you.
That help?
Thank you. Kathy Janega Dykes has been so patient out there. Whew. And Rich Block, I think he had to leave. I don't see.
To leave,
yeah,
yes.
And he just he recommends What is this? Oh, he would like to speak to, and he can't right now, but he doesn't, I don't know what he's saying. He says recommend decreasing the cut to CVB.
He's opposed
Got
to
it.
the CVB
Okay.
cut.
He did a two negative thing there, decreasing a cut. Got it. Okay, thank you. Kathy, followed by Mike Flint, who also left.
He had to leave as well, too.
Well, we're just taking
He's
too
making
long
the same
here.
recommendation.
He is, that's good. And then Steve Hislop will be next. Steve.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, my name is Kathy Chiniga Dykes. I'm president and CEO of the Santa Barbara Conference and Visitors Bureau and Film Commission. And I really realize how difficult your current budget considerations are, but I respectfully request that the budget for the Santa Barbara CVB not be reduced in the next fiscal year. I know that you're under a lot of pressure from other constituents, but our organization is different. We are an economic generator, and we increase revenues for the city. We give you a significant return on your investment. And I don't need to remind you that the transient occupancy taxes for revenues for Santa Barbara are very, very important to us all. The dollars earned from tourism in our community really sparks the quality of life that we all enjoy. And multiple studies have shown that marketers who continue to spend during the downturns, recessions, stand more to gain during these times than in the good times. So it's smarter for us to continue our efforts now rather than when a majority of advertisers jump back into the marketplace and begin spending again. We don't want to lose market share during the downturn, and we really need the funds to have a jump start when the economy starts to turn around. And many in our industry are expecting that to be around 2010. Thank you for the consideration. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. House and then Mr. Francisco.
Yes, hi, Ms. Janegia Dykes. Question for you. Please help us understand the relationship between the investment the city makes in CVB and the Film Commission and the return on that investment. I don't know if you've what the studies show, but what do we get for the investment and what
Most
kind
of the conversion studies that are done for these tourism industries show that for every dollar invested, you get about $12 back. But we just actually finished a research study, and our research study that the tourism industry for Santa Barbara County represents about a close to $1.4 billion industry. So you can see that the small amount of money that is invested in tourism marketing really does generate the revenues for the county.
Okay, the other side of that same coin is what would it mean to have an 8.4% reduction to your budget in terms of what you're able to deliver for the city of Santa Barbara?
What we've
and our
done,
South Coast
yes,
community?
absolutely. What we've done is prepared a marketing budget or a advertising budget based on the reduction of that budget. And it does, we've gone through all of our operational costs, and we've tried to reduce as much as we can with our operational costs, but it will affect some of the advertising. And now is the time, as I had mentioned earlier, this is the time when we really need the business the most, and we really need to be ramping up, not only for the recession time, but also when the economy starts to pick up as well, too. What we've also done as well, too, is really take a look at our marketing strategy and determine what is the most that we can get for the dollar that you all invest here. Most of our advertising in previous years was done more in what I consider traditional markets, print advertising, et cetera. We've moved a lot of those dollars to online marketing, and particularly during these times, we started that shift about 2 years. So what we've been able to do, unlike with print advertising, is be able to shift these advertising placements on a dime as we begin to notice perhaps some of the placements not generating the inquiries that we needed, and then make adjustments, for those dollars as well, too. So that's where we've been. But with the reduction of the budget, it will affect our overall advertising budget as well.
And what percentage do you get from, or how much do you get from the county?
The county is, we got about $105,000 for tourism funding, about another $75,000 for the Film Commission. It was about close to $200,000 with some additional funds that they wanted us to use for some exhibit areas. But
Are they talking about a cut too? They must.
They are proposing a cut for county funding as well, too.
That'll make a big difference for you too.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
That's
I did
okay.
say you. Yeah. And
Ms.
then
Janega
Falcone.
Dykes. Ms. Janega Dykes, I don't want to put you on the spot here with the numbers, but you're saying, so right now, the CVB budget is roughly 1.5 million, and you're saying there's 1.4 billion in tourist-related.
It's the total revenues
Right.
or total, yes.
So obviously, I mean, that's 1,000 times as
Yeah,
great.
right.
So the $1 generating $12, that's some fraction above and beyond whatever you might want to call the background rate or the natural rate of people just coming to Santa Barbara, whether there's advertising or not. See what I mean?
Yes, I do.
So I guess the question is how big a fraction is of that 1.4 billion is the stuff that's actually generated by marketing? And also, I guess the second question is, how does that compare? I mean, we know something like summer solstice or fiesta or 4th of July, all of those things directly attract, we know that, lots of people to the city. So how different is CVB's marketing compared to those things? That's, those are the kinds of things I'd like to understand. And I'm not saying this in any way to criticize.
Right.
I'm just trying to get a better quantitative sense.
Yeah. What we're doing is quite a bit different. I mean, obviously, we are promoting to each of those events that are outlined on here as well, too. But what we're also doing is promoting, the focus of our advertising campaigns are primarily trying to generate more revenues also during the winter period, when in normal years is when we need the businesses as the most. So it's beyond just promoting those particular events, but it's promoting primarily, during the winter period and promoting all the events and the attractions and the lodging businesses during that time frame as well, too. The other thing I wanted to also comment on these advertising dollars is when you take a look at our overall budget, we've done a very careful job to leverage the public dollars as well. So we generate probably about $200,000 in co-op advertising dollars as well. So what we've done is we've taken the public dollar and we've said to our hospitality partners and said we will create marketing platforms using these public dollars, but you also need to help pay for this as well too. So it's not just public dollars paying for these advertising campaigns. We're leveraging those with private funds as well too.
So there's a partial match.
There's a partial match, and that campaign has continued to grow as we are making some shifts toward online advertising as well, too.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Falcone.
A while ago, the city of Santa Barbara was sort of the big dog in terms of what your function was. Over the last 10 years or so, as the wine industry has grown, and certainly since the movie Sideways, which was, like 5 years ago by now or something?
5 years ago.
That component of why people come here has taken on a much, much larger, and I know that your focus has broadened into a regional, county-wide. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the valley, and there's a lot of synergies that you've created between the city of Santa Barbara and other jurisdictions, one of which is the county, but only one of which. Now, are you receiving commensurate sort of funding from the new city of Goleta, the cities of Buellton and Solvang, and the county? It sounds like their participation is quite small compared to ours. Now, that, again, is based on history, as a lot of these things sort of evolve over time. Can you tell me a little bit about where are we? Are we still your major funder? If so, how do we balance that a little better?
Yeah, absolutely. Councilmember Falcone. Let me just address this in a couple of different ways. You're absolutely right. The funding that we get from the county is disproportionate compared to the city. We are not currently receiving any funding from the other cities. However, we have approached several of those cities about trying to get some funding from them as well, too. The primary focus is, we do have members in the county, and they are generating some membership revenues for us. So we do have a responsibility for marketing those specific members. One of our primary objectives is not only to attract more visitors to the area, but also to encourage them to stay much longer instead of the typical 2.1 day stay, but to encourage them. And part of that is exposing them to some of the activities that they can enjoy in the county, whether it's wine tasting or going to Solving in some of those areas. So, our goal is to attract them to Santa Barbara, but hope that they will also stay longer, and that is part of our sales focus when we're marketing some of the outlying valley areas.
I understand that.
Yeah.
But I guess because, and I understand why proportionally the county contribution for one is considerably less than ours, is because they don't really have any hotels and people weren't really spending money in the county and so forth. That has changed. That has changed. Now it's not the time to ask people for more money or ask people for money at all, I suppose. But I think that since a lot of and the city of Goleta exists now, and you are doing a lot of promotions into the valley. So how can we help you to get cooperation from these other jurisdictions that are benefiting tremendously, and that will help all of us if we partner up somehow?
Thank you. And again, I think that the Lodging Association, Steve Hislop will speak a little bit more to this. We've already had some of those conversations, and we're going to need to continue with those conversations as far as helping or having those cities augment some of our tourism funding as well, too. But, yeah, I do appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Williams. Yeah.
Well, I think this has kind of changed into a discussion as we've gone through public comment.
No, we're not done yet.
So, and I think Steve still is up next.
I've got 3 more.
You got 3 more? Well, I'll hold off for
Okay. Okay. Steve, followed by Mitchell, and last one will be Drew. Yeah, Mitchell's gone, I know. Drew Wakefield.
Madam Mayor, council members, I'm Steve Hislop with, a tenant at the waterfront with Chuck's Waterfront Grill and the Endless Summer Bar Cafe. Also the president of the Greater Santa Barbara Lodging and Restaurant Association and a board member for the Santa Barbara Conference and Visitors Bureau and Film Commission. Are my 2 minutes up yet? In the interest of brevity, what she said was pretty much what I had to say. But I have a couple of, to a degree, anecdotal comments. One was that, and this I think was something that Rich Block was planning on speaking to and may have in his notes. As there is this conversation about an exponential, to use a word, increase in sales relative to the dollars that you invest in marketing, the flip side is true as well. And unfortunately, I didn't come prepared with numbers. Again, anecdotally, I will tell you that the state of Colorado many years ago decided to cut their marketing budget substantially, and they saw an exponential decrease in tourism to the state of Colorado. And it took them a number of years, spending a lot more money to get them back up close to the level where they were years before. And we can get those kinds of details for you if you'd like to have real numbers. Secondly, to somewhat address Councilmember Falcone's question, yes, we are having conversations with the other cities as we speak, and it's a challenging time for that for obvious reasons. But those are conversations that we're aware of, that they need to continue to happen. But I will, again, anecdotally, mention that at the waterfront, I frequently, and in fact, we work with the Santa Barbara County Vintners Association, I frequently will have people who ask about the wine country. And we will mention our urban wine trail, which is right here, if you don't want to drive to the valley, and it's kind of funky and fun and the great wines. But there's some people who heard about this fella named Fess Parker, and they want to go check his place out. Well, they end up staying another day. And as often as not, they're in a hotel in Santa Barbara. And when they come back, they're going to go someplace to eat. I hope they come to my place a second time. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But it is truly a synergy, and yes, others should share in that more, but I think it's something that we need to consider in terms of addressing the funding for the Conference and Visitors Bureau from the City of Santa Barbara. In conclusion, the Greater Santa Barbara Lodging and Restaurant Association hopes that you will consider all of those things and continue with the level of funding that you currently have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Oh, we have a question for you.
Mr. Hislop, I'm so sorry. I just want to ask you real quick. Your members in your organization are not only on the South Coast, but they're primarily on the South Coast of Santa Barbara County, if I understand correctly.
Yes.
And the primary source of funding for Conference and Visitors Bureau is from the City of Santa Barbara. And we recognize that there's benefits of this across the hill kind of marketing campaign that we've been doing, but I wonder to what degree your members would benefit and City of Santa Barbara benefit if a larger effort were made by Conference and Visitors Bureau to focus really on the South Coast and Santa Barbara in their marketing efforts as opposed to the county as a whole, given that nobody else is participating hardly.
I think that would be certainly a conversation that could be held, but would it generate the media interest? So to utilize another anecdotal, but I could back it up. There was a cover article on Sunset Magazine, July 2006, that meant, conservative estimate, $50,000 to my restaurant. Another major article, June 2007, where we were named one of the top 10 seafood restaurants on the sea in the West, something like that. Again, conservative estimate, another $50,000 to our restaurant, and more to other restaurants, tour operators, the folks who run the whale watching, sunset sailing, those types of things, etc. And that was all directly due to outreach from the Conference and Visitors Bureau. So I understand your question, and perhaps that's something that could be discussed, but there are definitely very real financial benefits to continuing to work with CBB.
Great. As much information as y'all can share with us in the next few days. I know we're going to be going into our deliberations really soon, but that's for yourself, but also for Conference and Visitors Bureau. It's going to really help us out in making some decisions.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Drew Wakefield? So, and I'm pretty sure of this, when the former mayor was sitting here and I was on the city council, we used to always, or she used to always say that the city shouldn't give $1 more than the county. We used to have almost even 10 years ago with city and county. And I just, I don't see that, because I see the great benefit to the city from doing the bigger advertising. But it used to be a big tug of war, and I really don't think we need to get into that again. But I just asked about the county because I knew that I had a feeling those revenues are going to go down for Conference and Visitors Bureau also, and that's very serious for them, for the CVB. Mr. Wakefield.
Madam Mayor, distinguished members of the City Council, I am standing here before you opposed to the 8.4% budget cut as well, roughly $120,000, $10,000 a month. Although the numbers will be shown by Kathy Janega Dykes and the SVCVB Board and Film Commission, I would just like to stand before you and just say there's a reason why each and every one of you ran for City Council, ran for mayor, is because you love our city. Is because our city is without a doubt one of the most beautiful, gorgeous places in the face of the earth, and definitely in the greater United States. At a time when other cities and counties and governments are cutting their budgets, people are going to see that, or actually they're not going to see the cities that they could go and travel to. But if we stand and we look at the money revenue that comes in from the SBCVB board, and we look at the money multiplier that generates the revenue that comes into our community, we're going to be able to take advantage of a lot of other communities that they're not going to have by having the people look at the advertisements, receive the emails, look at the publications. We've had a year of a lot of publicity, but unfortunately most of it's been because of the fires. And now we have an opportunity to be able to shine as a gorgeous, wonderful, beautiful city. I show the picture that's obviously quite old, but yet that's Santa Barbara. People come to the city, and every time they do, as a tourist, they spend money. We're locals, so we can go out in the evenings and we can do 2-for-1s with access cards, or we know certain shops to go to where we can receive discounts. But when tourists come to Santa Barbara, they spend money. And it's our job as hoteliers and restaurants and shop owners and shopkeepers to try to do the best job that we can do to help them spend their money in Santa Barbara, because we know that the more money that's spent in Santa Barbara, the more that we can do to assist and help each and every one of our city people in our community, just to do a better job to make our city that much more beautiful and effective. So I would stand before you today to say, unfortunately, we can't stand and say, raise the budget, but I would do that because I would liken it to one scenario. If you were a sports team and you wanted to succeed, you would not cut the budget of your team. Granted, there might be some budget cuts that you might have to make, but you would do everything possible to keep the stars on the field, because the fans come to see the stars. And the people come to Santa Barbara to enjoy this community. We have the most beautiful mountains, picturesque beaches, whale watching, dining, restaurants, and hotels. So I would stand before you again today opposed to the 8.4 budget cut. Thank you.
Thank you. I just got an idea. We could sell mic time for advertising. What do you think? No, I think it's very good. Mr. Williams. And then Ms. Schneider.
Well, just a little bit of background could be useful. I suppose if you want to blame the city for outpacing the county's portion, you probably could blame me, because I'm one of the liaisons to the Film Commission and to the CVB, along with Mr. Horton, and I have pushed for annual increases, and I do so because I attend not all of the meetings, but some of the meetings, and I see the money being spent efficiently. I see it well targeted. I see it particularly well targeted during the months that we need it in the winter, and with strategies to try to elongate people's visits. Do I know for sure that it, has a 12-fold increase? It may have a 12-fold increase in economic activity. Do I know for sure that it pays for more than it pays for itself in the amount of tax revenue we get? I don't know, because, we don't get as much tax revenue from restaurants. We get a decent amount of tax revenue from hotels, so when that's filled, that's easier to quantify. But I definitely think it's part of the overall strategy for making Santa Barbara work economically. And so, that being said, I can't, while we still have the danger of, if the grant doesn't come through from the federal government, cutting, sworn police officers, and, that we, facing a significant number of layoffs if we don't come up with at least $650,000 of alternate cuts tomorrow. So in that milieu, I can't say that we shouldn't cut the 8.4% at this time, but if we do our job good tomorrow, we iron that out, and the grant comes through, and we build in a little bit of extra money tomorrow beyond that 650, I think that we probably midway through the year should look at this again and look at if it isn't better to step up our investment, pending how well the budget, the actuals correspond to the budget in the middle of this crisis.
Okay, Ms. Schneider and then Mr. House.
Thank you. And first I want to thank the three people still here for your patience for 4 hours for 2 minutes each. And but you get a slice of what it is we're trying to go through. And again, to recognize it's sometimes hard to go one department at a time when everything is so important for that one particular department, yet we have to look at the entire city, and that's why, again, I think tomorrow is going to be a very important discussion. I was actually thinking along the same lines as Councilmember Williams in terms of at the 6-month review period to specifically look at this item and see what we can do in January, depending on what the revenues are, depending on where the other budget, the other funding coming in, on a variety of things. Because I agree with the argument that when things are tough, you need to market more and you need funding to do that. At the same time, that might give us some time to work with the two cities in particular, I think would be the cities of Solvang and Goleta, because Solvang in particular for the valley area, and that is a tourist destination, and so it makes a lot of sense. So that might give us some time and then still give us a chance to see what's going on and trying to balance our budget. I also have one question on the list of community promotions. I didn't see the film festival, and I don't see it in the arts one from weeks ago, so I want to make sure it's somewhere, because it should be somewhere. And I know a while back it was in the arts section, but we moved it over to line item status, but I don't see it. So I want to make sure that that's not an oversight. Maybe it's just not on the list. But
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Snyder, you might recall that we moved all those arts and festivals funding to Community Development Department.
No. We went the other way around with the film festival. The film festival, remember, we carved out.
The film festival is still in the Community Development Department, but it has, in effect, line item status. And we are proposing, just so it's clear, the same level of reduction in the funding for those programs as you saw here.
Right,
but
and I'm not making any argument about that. I just didn't see in either the City Arts Advisory Committee page or in this one anything about it, so I wanted to make sure that
it's in the community development budget.
Okay, because 4 years ago I thought we were trying to move it over to this side of it, but okay. And then I'll just throw out again what the New Beginnings contract, whether it's general fund, human services fund, something. I think we need to talk about that tomorrow too. It's $3,654. It's linking to our idea of human services, not cutting human services. So somehow I think we should have that discussion in some way. But thank you very much for your patience, though.
Thank you, Mr. House. You will be the last speaker tonight.
Thank you, and I'll be brief. I just want to say that we're going to be really debating this and working on this stuff, but my general inclination here is that with regards to revenue generating or economic generators like the ones that are in the list that we have here tonight, I am really loath to cut those. It seems to me that there's many of our conversations are truly zero-sum games where we're having to divide up the pie smaller and smaller. In this one, this particular category of this is talking about Solstice and CVB and Film Commission and all the rest in that list. These are the ones where we get a chance to generate the extra funds that we're going to need. And I mean, to me, at this particular time, Santa Barbara needs to really shine bright on anybody's list who's thinking about coming and doing something. And we're going to be the real destination for a day trip or 2 or 3 from the greater Los Angeles area. And if we are not out there, so I have a real concern about that, and we can talk more about it. I would really like for those who are here and those who support this notion to try to feed us as much real hard information as you have to try to justify what I just said and what you were just saying, because we really need to have some way to support that. Anecdotally, I believe in it, and I feel very strongly about it. The other option is for us as a city to help find other sources of funding to make up that gap. Maybe there's ways that we can find, creatively working together, other ways to bring in enough to fulfill not even maybe just that gap, but even maybe expand the sources of funding for our marketing effort. So those are the things that I wanted to say. Oh, and New Beginnings. I worry because, I mean, just think about the importance of that program to our community and the downside of us dropping the ball on that one. And so I guess maybe the same comments go. If we're going to have to cut off our source to some degree, how can we help them? And what can we do to be drawing attention to promoting, finding foundation support? What can we do to assist Gary Linker in his program? Because the impact of a what seems to be, for some people, that kind of lifestyle on the streets of Santa Barbara looks like blight. It can be completely counterproductive to our marketing efforts that CVB is doing. These things are complementary. So I just put that out there for us to discuss.
Good point.
Hey, wait, and you had a whole finance presentation that we didn't even comment on. Thank you very much. Very clear.
Absolutely.
I can't believe you went through 13 different programs, and but it was, to me, I think it was as crystal clear as it can be, and I appreciate for a layperson how eloquently, how efficiently you made your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Armstrong.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I just wanted to tell you what our plans were for tomorrow and also for the rest of the week and next week. We've given you a packet, and it's a rather detailed packet. Our plan tomorrow was not to have you in a decision-making mode, but instead to walk you through all of the information, and then the following Tuesday to kind of lay out some decision matrices for you. We also think you have a closed session on Thursday in labor negotiations, and I think one of the reasons we timed this way is we think that will give you the information that you can then give us direction to the negotiating team in terms of our negotiations with the employee groups. And so our plan tomorrow was to walk you through that workbook that we provided you today. I'm sorry for the length of it. We finished at about 2 o'clock today. Different departments were working on it. But for the most part, I think because it's been such a long day, we'll walk you through it, and you'll have another week to digest it. So I don't think you need to stay up till 12 o'clock tonight to read it. But our plan tomorrow was basically to not say, okay, once we go through it, to ask you to make decisions. You can if you like, and you can express opinions. But our idea was then the following Tuesday we'd get into a kind of a decision-making mode and kind of say, okay, how do you want to balance the budget?
Well, and I appreciate having all this information. I was just kidding about watching TV tonight. But no, this is really good information, and I appreciate the fact that the staff worked so hard on it. It was good. So we'll see you tomorrow morning at 9:30, I think, unless anybody has something else. Okay, thank you very much. We are adjourned. See Brenda.